Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Red Dot Forum Camera Talk. It has been a minute since we have been live. Last episode, we talked about the Deluxe 8, which was newly introduced. Leica has been kind of on a tear lately. They also announced the M11D as well, which we will be doing an episode on, but we thought we'd focus on this first. No pun intended. So,
who are you?
I'm playing you. I'm playing you because I'm sitting on this side.
That's right.
I have to have some cheesy pun.
You have to introduce yourself to show all the fans who don't know who you are.
Yes. So thank you for joining us. As always, I am David Farkas. I'm joined by Josh Lehrer.
Hey, everyone.
Over there producing the show, we've got Jose Rivera.
Hello, hello.
And all of you out there in the internetverse. So thank you for joining us on this Saturday night or whenever you're watching this on replay. So Josh, what are we talking about tonight?
So a couple of weeks ago, I think it was September 5th, I want to say, Leica introduced a new lens and a new lens accessory. That was the 70-200 2.8 L mount, which is right here.
Right there.
This adds to the complement of existing L mount lenses, specifically L mount telephoto lenses, which we have brought with us today. There it is.
Oh, I'll do it since you have an ugly keyboard.
I have a keyboard
anyway.
back there. On David's side. There we go.
There we go. Come over to my side.
There it is. Where's you got other stuff in the way? Anyway, so this is the new and magical 7200. Now, if you are or have been in the photography world for any amount of time, you are already probably familiar with this focal length because the 70-200 2.8 has been a staple lens in just about every camera brand ecosystem for as long as I can remember.
Yeah,
like decades and decades and decades. And Leica is a bit late to the game, but better late than never, I say. And now we have so many options.
There are many options
in the lineup that it gets a little bit overwhelming because in addition to the 70-200, we also launched the 2X Extender. This pairs or complements the 1.4X Extender that was introduced,
which I have right here,
last year or something, when the 100 to 400 millimeter lens was introduced.
Yep.
So now we have 3 different telephoto lens options, 2 different telephoto lens extenders.
Yes.
And just to mention this up at the top, these extenders will not work with the 90-280.
No.
In fact, they won't work with any SL lens except for the 100 to 400 and the 70-200. So
that's right here.
That's important to mention. So you can't use them with any other SL lenses, just the 70-200 and the 100 to 400. But basically, you have the option to go from 70 all the way to 800 millimeters now.
Correct.
With these extenders.
Yes. So yeah, we are now pretty spoiled for choice. And I think we're going, why don't we do this? Let's do a kind of a brief overview for those that aren't, 8 million % invested in the SL system and know all the options.
Sure.
We're not going to go over all the SL lenses. It's not an SL lens episode yet. We're not there yet.
We'll get there.
We're just going to talk about the telephoto zoom options because now we have 3 options.
Yes.
We have the newly introduced 70-200 f2.8 constant aperture zoom. We have the initial 90 to 280 f2.8 to 4. That is a variable aperture zoom, but only in that one stop range. And it is obviously much longer than 200. And then we have the 100 to 400 f5 to 6.3. These all serve different purposes, and I think what we're going to get into is how to choose which one or ones make it into your kit, and also taking into account the telephoto extenders, how those play into decision making as well. Because it can be a little confusing having
it was for us.
It was for us, right? I mean, we went back and forth, and we're just sort of bouncing ideas and use cases and different kind of trips, different kind of applications of where we thought these could hit those right points. And I think we're going to try to summarize that. We won't go into the entire discussion because we'd be here. We don't have that kind of time. Also, of course, Josh did lots and lots of in-depth testing. You said, was it 16 different combinations?
Not quite that many, but between all the different focal lengths that I tested with and without extenders at different apertures, it's like 60 or 70 different distinct images.
Oof.
So quite a comprehensive. Yeah, I was in the store till midnight on Friday, and I was calling you.
Right.
But the goal, of course, is to get the clearest idea as to where each of these lenses sit, because there is, of course, overlap in terms of focal length to some degree.
Right.
Especially when you start adding the extenders to the mix, there's even more overlap. So like David said, it can get a little bit overwhelming or a little confusing to understand, well, what do I need and when, if I can have, for example, 200 millimeters, like 7 different ways.
Right.
It's exhausting.
It is. So
we're here.
We're here to help you, yeah. So, and I think actually it's funny that you mentioned 200 millimeter, and we'll get into this more about when we show the results of the testing.
Yeah.
But 200 millimeters is kind of that common denominator, right? That every one of these lenses and the adapters, the telephoto converters, can hit 200 millimeters. So it's sort of, it was the one area that we could actually compare everything against each other.
Correct, because if you think about it, with the 1.4x or the 2S extenders on either the 70-200 or the 100-400, you can get to 200 millimeters with both.
Exactly.
So it's actually 6 different, plus the 90-280, 7 different 200 millimeter methods. So of course I tested all of them against each other to get the clearest understanding as to how that all works. With the goal really to, as David said, to understand where each of these lenses fits in a potential bag, potential kit, and why you would want one over the other, or why you would want more than one, whatever.
Yes.
So unfortunately, the only thing I didn't really get to do was a bunch of real world shooting.
Right.
Just because we just got the 70-200 a few days ago, like 2 days ago. So that's something we'll do in the future. I feel like I'm always promising things and never delivering, but this time.
But this time's different.
That's right. I mean, I do want to do some action stuff with the 70-200.
Sure.
Because again, my sports photography days back in the vintage days.
For those that don't know, I'm just going to pause Josh. For those that don't know, Josh actually was a professional sports photographer for a period of time.
Yeah, for a long time. That was like my early days before I, started working here in 2010.
So you have a lot of familiarity with a 70-200 focal length.
Oh, for sure. That's a focal length that you just have with you all the time. When I was shooting my own stuff, and then I was assisting other photographers for Sports Illustrated, we always had a 70-200 around one of us somewhere all the time, because it's just such a useful focal length for almost any type of action. And the real advantage here that the 70-200 brings over the other two lenses is, of course, the fact that it's 2.8.
Right. What? Okay. Let's take it.
Yeah.
Take it back. Let's talk specifics about the lens.
Yeah.
Let's get into specs.
Yeah.
Weight, size, dimensions, all that, and design philosophy. And then talk about, I think, the best use cases for this lens in particular, since it is the new one.
Yeah, this lens slots really nicely into the lineup. So over the last few years, we saw a 24-70 2.8, then we saw a 14-24 2.8, and now we have a 70-200 2.8. So now within the Leica SL,
so all of these.
Exactly. Now you have 14-200 continuously, all at 2.8, which is really, really nice. And both the 24-70 and the 70-200 and the other lenses minus the 14-24 have an 82 millimeter filter thread as well. So you have 2.8 throughout the range. You have the same filter size throughout the range.
Except for the 14-24.
Right,
because that takes rear filters.
Exactly. So you've got this really, really nice range. So that's where the 70-200 could slot in really nicely, just in terms of like, if your OCD insists you have to have 2.8 across the range, then it fits in really well. So spec-wise,
let's go over that. I'm gonna get a close up here.
Forgive me as I'm looking at the specs here because I didn't memorize all of them.
So there's
1,540 grams, which is
what is that in ounces?
About 50 something ounces, about 3.5 pounds if my memory serves.
Okay.
Which is about the same weight as the 90-280, which comes in at a little bit lighter than 90-280. 90-280 is 1,710 grams.
Well, let me put both of those in frame so you could see the comparison.
The weights in front
Since
of me.
People are familiar.
Well, that's the length that's been out the longest, right?
Exactly.
The 90-280 has been out for almost 10 years, something like that.
Hard to believe.
Which is crazy. So here we can see these two lenses side by side.
My OCD is getting me.
There we go. So there's the 90-280 on the bottom, and the new 70-200. We'll put this so the backs line up or something. Yeah, there you go. So of course you can see that the 90-280 is longer. It is 238 millimeters to 207 millimeters. So about 31 millimeters longer. Same filter thread size. So they're both an 82 millimeter filter thread. So diameter is going to be very similar.
And what's also interesting about both lenses, both are internal zooming and internal focusing, right? So the lenses don't extend past this. This is the absolute longest and shortest the lens will be because they are internal focusing, internal zooming for both of these lenses.
Correct. Yes. So again, weight-wise, we're at 1,710 grams for the 90-280. So if you have that lens or if you've handled it and you can kind of imagine that reference, we're about 180 grams, 170 grams lighter for the 70-200 2.8, which is pretty good considering that it's a 2.8 throughout the range. So yeah, smaller and lighter by...
So something else that is worth mentioning as well, when you take a look at the lenses side by side again, you can also see there is a difference in design philosophy. So on the 90-280, the longer lens, we've got the zoom ring positioned in the middle. On the 70-200, it is a little shorter lens, so now it is positioned on the front. And this is basically, you can see, if we held it, let me see if I can actually hold my hand here.
There you go.
Right, so when I'm holding the camera naturally, you could see just my thumb and forefinger are naturally positioned to change the zoom position. And it is a pretty short zoom throw relative to the 90-280. So it's very easy to move between the major focal lengths. Especially, let's say, in this 70 to 135 range. This is your typical portrait focal length range. And I find that that's really nice in terms of being able to tweak the focal length really easily, just fingertip wise.
Yeah.
And we don't need to use the focus ring for the most part because autofocus on the camera is really good, especially with the, say, eye face body or the animal detection. So this is a little bit more awkward to hold the lens back here to use the manual focus. So I like this decision to have the zoom ring forward because it just sits very naturally of where you would be shooting it. And that's not to take away from the 90-280 because it's a longer lens, that zoom ring, again, sits in that right spot. So the difference in overall length of the lens leads to that design decision. So let's get back to the specs.
Yes. So as you mentioned, it's a little bit shorter than 90-280. It's a little bit longer than the 100-400, which we'll grab here
let's
in a
do
second.
that.
There we go.
I'm sorry,
400. That's okay. 100-400 is 198 millimeters.
Oh gosh, this one is.
Is it dirty? Oh no.
He's a dirty boy.
So it's about 9 millimeters longer.
It's really close.
It's very, 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 very close. In practical terms, it feels almost exactly the same. Weight is almost exactly the same within 10 grams. It's 10 grams heavier.
Yep.
I don't notice a difference. Again, filter thread size is the same. And they also share the same tripod foot.
They do.
Which this one doesn't have on it.
No, that's why I'm holding it
you
up.
lost it.
So this is the tripod foot, which they redesigned from this is the original tripod foot.
For the 90-280.
The 90-280, which is also compatible.
Right, so I'll mention this right now. So number one, the 100-400 and the 70-200 include the same tripod foot, which is really right stuff for Arca Swiss compatible. It's different from the 90-280 foot. However, the 90-280 foot and 100-400 / 70-200 foot are fully interchangeable. So they both work on all the lenses. So if you've already got a really nice, really right stuff plate that you like, and you like the extra height that the 90-280 foot gives you, you can throw that on the 70-200 and the 100-400. Conversely, if you like the lower foot that's already Arca compatible, you can throw that on the 90-280.
So just to be clear, so this here, as you can see, this, even though it does have threading on it, 1/4-20 tripod thread, it does have a Arca Swiss compatible quick release built into the mount, which is really handy.
Yes.
And then this is your release here, and you can see.
Pull it up.
Yeah, you gotta just.
I gotta pull this. Pull this.
Yep.
Clearly, David has. That's why David lost
There we
the
go.
foot because
Right.
you don't know how to put it back on.
Right. So you do it like this, and you pull.
There you go.
You gotta want it. So
very graceful.
this foot, by comparison, has a release button.
Yeah, different design, and then you get a tripod 1/4-20 socket on the bottom, so even if you lose the foot, you can still put it on a tripod, which is nice.
Yep.
And then the knob on the side allows you to rotate. This is like standard stuff, but just so you know, the knob allows that to rotate.
With
so you
the
can
detents.
quickly go vertical or horizontal or whatever when the lens is on a tripod or a monopod. So, all the design cues you would expect to see on a telephoto lens like that.
And some nice touches too. There's a little rubber gasketing here. So that it keeps the wobble to a minimum as well.
Speaking of gasketing, so just like all of the other SL L-mount lenses in the lineup, the 70-200 is weather and dust resistant, and it does have the Aquadura hydrophobic coating on the front. So you get all the weather sealing that you get with all the other SL lenses, and you get the Aquadura coating on the front
and the back,
and you get the back, and then you get the gasketing, which you probably can't see, but yeah. So that's one of the main advantages of when you get into a Leica L-mount lens like that, an SL full frame L-mount lens, it's going to have that weather sealing, that dust sealing, that Aquadura coating, just like all the other lenses do. So if you're familiar with one, then you know them all.
All right. So that's kind of the basics here. Let's go over minimum focus as well, because that is very important to a lot of people.
That I didn't memorize either, so we're going to look at it. So with the 70-200, we are at 0.65 meters minimum focus, which is super close.
At
70,
okay.
And then 1 meter at 200, which is also very close.
That's really close.
I mean, closer than you're almost ever going to need to be. With the 90-280 for reference, at 90 we were at 0.6 meters, So a little bit closer, actually, which is, we'll talk about this later, but sort of how to choose between them. That could be a must-have for someone.
For sure.
Which then goes to, where did it go? 1.4 meters at the 280 range.
So longer.
And then the 100 to 400, we are at 1.1 meters at 100 and 1.59 at 400. So
it's a pretty big difference, actually.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's hard to have exact equivalents because the focal lengths are a little bit different.
Sure.
But the general vibe is that the 90-280 focuses the closest, 70-200 focuses the second closest, and the 100-400 focuses the last closest.
The last closest?
Yeah, the furthest.
The furthest.
I don't know the best way to explain that.
We know the English.
Yeah, so handling-wise, the 70-200 handles more like the 100-400, except it does not extend when you zoom it.
Yeah, I didn't demonstrate that.
Yes.
So when we talk about internal zooming and internal focus, the 100-400, and you can just look in the wide shot here.
Yeah.
It almost, I'd say, increases by 50%, 60%
So
length.
the 70-200 might be 9 millimeters longer than the 100-400, but that's only when the 100-400 is zoomed all the way into 100. So as soon as you extend that out, it's considerably larger.
And that was done because it is a 400 millimeter. It's twice the focal length.
Yes, exactly.
You would expect it to be 400 millimeters when it's fully extended.
Exactly.
That's that. And in order to keep the lens dimensions compact, they went with the telescoping design rather than the internal design. As we can see with the 90-280, it's longer because it has to be 280 millimeters.
Exactly, yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah, they could have made it extendable, but then it would have been the same size when it was extended. So instead, they create just one super self-contained sealed unit, which makes it as durable and as sealed as possible.
Yes.
And, this lens has been around for a long time, and it's big compared to M lenses if you're used to them.
Obviously.
But this has been my main SL lens for a very long time, and I'm just used to it, especially because I know what it can do performance-wise, that it's never really been an issue for me. I mean, I'm probably not going to go take it on a 10-mile hike on a mountain, although I probably would actually, but
But a lot of, and when we talk about use cases, a lot of people do choose the 100.
Correct, because that 300 something grams makes a big difference.
As we say, I don't know what it is, if there's a metric version of this, but in English, or not English, in American, we say every ounce counts when you've got it on your back and you're hiking up a mountain. 100%. So I guess every gram counts. I don't know.
Yeah. So again, 100-400 and the 70-200 are going to feel very similar. Of course, the focal lengths are different. The extendable zoom is different, but same foot.
And the maximum aperture is very, very
well.
different.
That's the other thing is 100-400 is an f5 to f6.3, which keeps it that size.
Yes.
70-200 much shorter, but of course almost twice as fast. Well, depending on where you look at it.
Exactly.
Aperture-wise, so 2.8 throughout the range, which again pairs really nicely with the 24-70 and the 14-24, so you get that whole 2.8 throughout the whole range. Traditionally, before these lenses, we just did 24-90 and 90-280, and it was kind of like 2.8-4 and 2.8-4, so it was a little bit weird to go into 4, and then you started to, it was whatever. Of course,
somehow we survived.
I was going to say, we got used to it, but now we have the option to go 2.8 throughout the range, which is very, very nice.
Exactly.
I want to talk a little bit about, just teasing a little bit of results. I tested really two concepts here that I had really the time to do, which was one, of course, the image performance testing, which we'll get to.
Yes.
But also I tested autofocus.
Okay.
Because one of the questions we definitely got was how does the autofocus perform on these various lenses with or without the teleextender? So actually, I'm just going to pull this up for me. You don't have to go to the computer, Jose. So what I did was I have a rough method of doing this kind of testing. I have basically it's an autofocus timer, and you rack the lens out of focus. You focus, you press the shutter, focus, shoot a picture of a timer that starts when you hit the shutter button. And you do that enough times, you can get a good sense of speed. It doesn't cover tracking speed, it just covers basically
lock on. It's lock on and shooting speed.
Exactly, right. So if you're going from one extreme distance to the other, and that's a pretty good measurement of sort of how it feels.
Sure.
Even if it's not super scientific, it is how it feels. And what I discovered, interestingly, but not surprisingly, was that the 70-200 is the fastest focusing of the bunch.
I would expect that, given that it has the fastest aperture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the newest, meaning it's got the latest firmware, the latest technology, the latest everything, compared to the 90-280, which is 10 years old. And it also gathers the most light, being 2.8 throughout the range. So the metrics that I saw were, compared to the 90-280, we are, I'm going to make sure I get the right number here. Yes, about 20% faster autofocus than the 90-280, which is not nothing.
Not nothing at all.
Now, the 100-400, also a bit newer, so that's similar. It's only about 12% faster. Again, it sounds like these are scientific, but it's like quasi-scientific. But again, it does represent how the lens is going to feel when you're using it compared to the other ones. So we got about, I'd say 12% faster than the 100-400. And when you go to the 1.4-inch extender, you lose about 20% of that. So it's also about 12% faster.
Well, makes sense because you're losing a stop of light.
Correct. So you go. So if I were to assign like arbitrary numbers, what I do is I have like it's just lower is better. So the 70-200 at 180, for example, is 25, a score of 25, compared to the same focal length with a 1.4x converter, it's a score of 33. Basically, about 20%, or it should be 30% faster without the extender.
Sure.
So the extender definitely slows you down, which makes sense because number one, it's reducing the amount of light that's coming into the lens, and it's additional electronics and componentry in between. What was really interesting was that the 2x extender was faster. So if the lens by itself is a 25,
yes,
it's a 33 with the 1.4x. It was a 28. And my theory is that the extender is limiting the focus range more, so I just can't rack it as far out, so it has less range to cover to go back.
Right, because the minimum distance
changes dramatically.
Yeah.
So that's my theory, but the good news is it doesn't slow it down to some ridiculously sluggish speed. It's actually almost as fast as the lens is without the extender at all. And then interestingly enough, the 90-280 was a 30. So actually slower than even the 70-200 with the 2x, which again makes sense.
Interesting.
It's a lot heavier.
Sure.
A lot more glass to move, and it's just older. I mean, we've all seen how far Leica has come with all their technology in the last 10 years.
Absolutely.
So that doesn't surprise me. And then the 100-400 was a 28 score, so about the same speed as the 70-200 with the 2x teleconverter. And the slowest of them all was the 100-400 with the 1.4x, which was a 38. So that's really the slowest. I didn't test the 100-400 with the 200 with the 2x because it didn't fit with the focal length I was testing.
Sure.
So if you want the fastest autofocus possible, 70-200 with no extender at all. And then if you are willing to give up some light, some stoppage, the 2x on there is going to be the second fastest, coming into the same speed as the 100-400. So good news for people who are shooting action at sports, especially because it's not a secret that Leica's autofocus for tracking does lag behind some of the other big players in the industry.
Sure.
Well, they've come a long way.
Especially with the SL3.
Yeah.
And now SL3, and we've got the hybrid phase detect and contrast detect autofocus system.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just speaking for myself, I use the 90-280 and the SL3 when I was doing workshop in the Faroe Islands, and we went to this island that looked something out of like Bond villain or something, giant spire. Anyway, there was thousands of puffins there because we went to this little island to go shoot puffins, and I just put it on the animal beta mode, shot wide open at 280, and shocking. I mean, just every feather, and it was. I couldn't even tell in the viewfinder if it was really sharp or not, and I was just shooting like a madman. Everyone was because they're so cute, the little puffins, and they have the fish in their mouth and all this, and they're moving around, and I was shockingly impressed by the animal detection autofocus in the SL3, and that's with the slowest lens for autofocusing. So personally, I'm curious. With the 70-200, how that would be, because it could actually be even faster and more accurate. So
yeah, I mean, of course, the advantage. I mean, well, would you spend a lot of time with the 280 range, or were you close enough to be?
I did spend a lot of time at 280 because the reason that the puffins are there is they're actually nesting and they have younglings. So they dive into the ocean, they come back with these fish, and they drop them in the hole for the little ones to eat. And the thing is, if you're standing too close to them, they won't go to the holes because, you're dangerous. They're like this big.
Okay.
So, so we had to keep our distance since it was kind of an active hatchery. And, or hatchery? No, I don't know. I can't remember the word for
bird.
Bird something.
Yeah.
There's a bird word.
Yeah.
I'm sure someone's going to put it in there. I'm not big with the birds. So we were just keeping our distance, being friendly to nature, letting it happen. We were there to photograph, not to intrude.
Right.
So 280 was great. And we did have a lot of people on that same trip who were using the 100-400 and got great results as well. So I know that, both those options worked really well, but they were shooting in the 200-400 range a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if
same reason.
you're going to have the 100 to 400 with you in an environment like that, you're probably going to take advantage of that reach that you
Absolutely.
have. Yeah,
Absolutely.
And I'm sure you were a little jealous because you only had 280, but
Only had 280. Thankfully, with 60 megapixels, you can crop a little bit. So, yeah.
that's true. And that does change the game to a degree in terms of using extenders, using this, using that. But there is no substitution for resolution, as we say, in this case.
Isn't it no substitute for displacement or no whatever?
It's not replacing for displacement.
Right, yeah, there you go.
I'm just modifying it.
Yeah, thanks.
Because we know we're very spoiled now having 60 megapixels on almost everything in the lineup.
Yeah.
And yes, you can crop like crazy, but I don't want to if I don't have to.
Exactly.
Which is where the extenders come in, which is where the 100 to 400 comes in. Because for years, between the end of the R system and really the heyday of the SL system, we were lacking in the telephoto range.
For sure.
For the longest time, the longest you could get was the 180 for the S.
For the S, yeah.
Yeah, that
Which
was
really was like a 145.
Yeah, so that, and for years we had to put up with that. And then the SL 601 came out, and then we saw the 9280 come out, and it was like, it was amazing. We were so happy. And then years and years and years of asking for more telephoto lenses, and they have a long way to go still.
Sure.
But now we have 3 telephoto lenses plus 2 extenders, and most of that stuff which came out in the last 3 or 4 years.
Correct.
Which is, growth that I like to see. I mean, I want to see that continue, but I think now it just adds significantly to the viability of a system that is still relatively young. If we look at the L mount, it's been around only for 10 years, right? Since the TL to the T in 2014, right?
2013?
13, 14, whatever.
The original T was
10-ish
2013.
years versus you look at some of the big players in the market that have had their mounts for way longer.
Sure.
So I've been very happy to see.
And they've only had full frames since 2015.
15.
Yeah. End of 2015.
Oh, a rookery or a colony?
No, it wasn't either.
I want to call it a rookery.
No, not a rookery. No.
That sounds awesome.
Promontory.
I don't know.
No, I think it's...
I eat birds. I don't know about that.
I think it's rookery.
No, I look up promontory. I'm pretty sure.
We don't have to waste
Anyway,
time. It's okay.
I did want to touch on the teleconverters.
Yes. Well, they're called extenders, Dave.
Leica Extender. They're just Leica Extender. Okay. So let's just go over this for 1 second because we're making the assumption that everyone knows what these are.
Right. You should talk about how these work and what their effect is on focal length and aperture.
Right. So
What did you just?
I don't know. That wasn't me. I didn't do it. All right. Something bad just happened in it off camera.
Breaking stuff.
All right. So we have the existing Leica Extender L 1.4x, and we have the new Leica Extender L 2.0x. That's, as the name says, basically you take the focal length, you multiply by 1.4, or you take the focal length and you multiply by 2x. These are optical pieces. As you can see, there's a pretty big piece of glass there, both front and rear. So essentially, it is like a lens. There's multiple elements in there. You can see that we've got the electronic contacts.
And they're serialized. They have their own serial number.
Yeah. So there's a little serial number right there, if you can see it. Yeah. There's a serial number there. So these are actual optical pieces, unlike, say, a macro adapter, which is just an extension tube. Right? These are not extension tubes. These are actual optical units, and they look different because they're different magnifications.
Correct. So
The way they work is we take the back of the lens off, well, the lens cap off.
the back of the
Don't take the back of the lens
It's sort of the back of the lens. Yeah.
Yeah, don't do that. All right. And this side goes here, and they also have red dots for lining up, but
You gotta.
nope,
get
the other
it
way,
down,
right
yeah.
there.
Well,
So-
just show it on camera so they can
Okay,
see.
so you can see where the little catch is here. You line up the catch with the red dot on the lens, like so, and you turn that way, and you'll see the red dots line up this way, so they go on the camera.
And you do,
Like so.
best practice is to mount the extender to the lens and then that combination to the body. I do try to avoid mounting the extender to the body and then the lens to that, because that puts a lot of torque on the extender, which you generally want to avoid.
It is one-handed. Yep, got it.
There you go.
Oh, that is filthy also.
It's your sensor.
Nope.
There you go.
Not true. And yeah, so we mount it this way. Okay, and
There we go.
so,
So
that is our finished setup.
the 2X extender, or is that what's on there now, the 2X?
This is a 2x, yeah.
Has 3 impacts on the lens. Number one, it makes it longer physically, as you can see, because it's an object that sits in between the lens and the body. Number 2, it doubles the focal length. So this is now a 140 to 400 millimeter lens. And number 3, it decreases the maximum aperture by 2 stops, meaning you now have a 140 to 400 f5.6.
Continuous.
So, continuous. So you lose 2 stops of light and you gain twice the focal length.
Now, safety tip here. With the 70-200, you should be using the tripod foot. Once you mount the extender, you absolutely need to use the tripod foot.
Yeah.
Where you may have gotten away with mounting the camera to your tripod or monopod or whatever, because you now have this extra piece in between, you now have 2 connections. You really need to support it at the midpoint, not on the camera, because you do not want all that weight putting strain on both the rear and the forward attachment points.
Yeah.
So please, please, please use the foot for whatever you're going to do. Or if you are holding the camera, make sure that you're fully supporting the lens and then grabbing the camera. Don't just put 2 hands on the camera and let the lens sag.
Right. So this is the combination that was announced, which was the 70-200 with the 2x extender. But of course, the already existing 1.4x extender works
fully compatible
fantastically on the 70-200, and we'll show you how that looks as well. So what that's going to do is makes the lens also longer, but not quite as much because it's just a little bit skinnier, and it increases your focal length by 40%. So you have a 98 millimeter to 280 millimeter lens. So it's almost like a 90 to 280, except it's a 98 to 280.
I mean, you could tell it 100 to 280.
Yeah. Well, I'm just being specific.
You're being very specific.
And then a maximum aperture of f4. So you lose 1 stop of maximum aperture, and you gain 40% longer focal length throughout the range. So this is, on paper, similar to the 90-280. Of course, in practice, it's different, and we'll show that when we talk about some of our testing. But yeah, can we get the overhead?
Sorry, I was trying to clean things up here.
It's a mess.
It's a little mess. Okay, there you go. So it's a little more compact.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah, and again, this the 1.4 and 2x extenders do not work with 90-280. They only work with the 70-200 and the 100-400. Can you stack the extenders? I haven't tried that.
We're not doing that.
Does that work?
We're not doing that.
Why not?
Oh no!
What's the worst that could happen? Maybe we'll do it. We'll do it later. Maybe.
Let's see. You keep going.
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't know if you could.
I don't know.
I don't know. I'm like dying to find out. What if they don't come apart again?
Oh, they're not going to fit.
You don't think so?
Nope. I can tell.
Oh no, definitely not. What about the other way? No, I'm not gonna.
No.
So apparently you cannot stack the extenders.
No, because this is the attachment point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're going to get the overhead of why you shouldn't do this,
but you can't.
You'll notice that this protrudes and is.
Well, I have a screwdriver. Let's just take it apart.
And then there's a piece of glass right there, and clearly we don't want to go any further than that.
Not gonna work.
Well, I mean, bad things are going to happen.
Yeah. Okay. So if anyone asks later, no, you cannot stack the 2 extenders to make
don't ask.
super extender.
We told you not to do it.
Not that you would want to do that, because that would be. You lose all the special. Yeah. Don't lose the special body caps for these things, because they're like really weird, and I have no idea how to get replacements. So it's like a small piece of advice to anyone using the extender. So
okay,
we now have a pretty significant number of options, because if you break it all down, we have the 70-200 by itself, the 70-200 with the 1.4 extender, the 70-200 with the 2x extender, the 100-400 by itself, the 100-400 with the 1.4x extender, the 100-400 with the 2x extender, the 90-280. Don't even get me started on putting it in APS-C mode, because then it's
oh, that's right.
So the question is, how are you supposed to decide what combination of lenses and extenders is best for you? So I think we should talk about it a little bit first, and then maybe we'll get into some of the testing.
Well, let's.
What are you thinking?
Prior to that, because we've been kind of going on and on and on about this, let's check with Jose, see if we have any questions about what we talked about so far before we dive into the use cases and our thoughts.
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, the questions are one of the questions was about quality and how much
which we'll get to.
Yeah, which we'll get to, and then a recommendation.
Which we'll
200 or 100-400 with the other extender. So. Let me see. Yeah, I think we should just kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think we pretty much answered everything.
All right, so everyone is up to speed. We're good.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, the other one is also about performance, sharpness, 70-200.
We're gonna get all that.
We're gonna get there. It's not very exciting. Well, exciting for me, but
actually, do you want to cover the results first, and then we can kind of speak with
About
a little
use
bit
case?
more authority
Yeah.
about use case, because then
Yeah.
we'll know where the lenses excel or
Sure.
fall
Let me
short.
just give myself a little space here.
I think that's going to be a great place to
Yeah, I'm
start.
fine with that. So
We're diving in. We're getting.
I spent my Friday night doing my very best to compare these lenses with each other with my famous test targets. I will confess it was challenging. And if I had more time, I would have done this outside in a more real world environment if I could have found something that I could control enough. Because when you start to get this long, especially on the long end of the bigger lenses, it becomes very difficult to have a perfectly flat field of focus.
Sure.
Because if you're angled even by a tiny amount, you're going to have different, one corner is going to be sharp and one corner is going to be soft. So that is definitely something that I encountered, but I still was able to gain a fair amount of insight into how these lenses compare to each other and how they feel and how they handle and how they operate. And thus we could then sort of divine different use cases and where things would be better. So I want to get to the most asked question first, if I could. Even though I did a lot of testing, the question that I received the most so far is, should I get the 70-200 and the 2x extender or the 100-400? I think that was a question that was in the chat. Because, of course, the 70-200 with the 2x extender at the long end is a 400-5.6, and the 100-400 at the long end is a 400-6.3. So you may say, oh, well, that's a third of a stop better, right? Half a stop?
Third.
A third? Whatever.
Third half.
So maybe I should just do that instead. Why would I even bother with 100 or 400? And what I have discovered is that the performance basically demonstrates which one you should pick pretty clearly. So I'm going to find them if you give me a minute here, because they're, let's see, that's the 1.4. Hold on. 200 millimeters. Okay, sorry. I need 400 millimeters. That's there's a lot of testing, so it takes you a minute to kind of go through everything. So what I did was I tried every combination that gets to 400 millimeters, both wide open and stop down 2 stops, because the goal was to understand what is wide open for performance, which is where a lot of us spend our time, but then what happens when you actually get into the optimum zone for performance to really flesh out which lens is better than the other. So if we take a look at, let's see here, I think this should be it. We have, yes. So we have you just close that here. The 70-200 with the 2x extender on the left here, and the 100-400, there we go, with no extender at all on the right, both at 400 millimeters.
Mm-hmm. And it is worth noting.
Yes.
You'll notice it says, can you put your mouse over it? That it
yeah.
says 400 millimeter. Nope.
Here.
Yeah. So it recognizes the lens. Sorry, I'm pointing with out of frame. It recognizes the lens, and it recognizes the extender, and it gives you the actual resulting focal length as in your metadata.
Correct.
Which is very convenient.
Yes, you don't have to do any kind of math or conversions post shooting. It's going to tell you exactly the focal length that you actually used, and it's going to indicate that you had the extender attached, which is extremely nice.
Absolutely.
I wasn't sure about that, so I did the quick initial test to find out, and I was very relieved because otherwise I'd have to start labeling things, and it would have been a huge pain. So let's take a look at the super awesome test targets of the 70-200 at 400 and the 100-400 at 400, and let's take a look and see. And if you can hopefully see this on your screens, the results are pretty obvious right away.
Wow.
The 100-400 at 400 is sharper than the 70-200 with the 2x extender, which to me is exactly what I expected, because wide open, any extender, any extra glass and electronics in between the back of the lens and the sensor is going to degrade performance by some degree.
So we actually saw this same situation. If you remember when we did our macro episode,
yes,
and we started testing lenses with the L Pro and with the macro adapter, and when we stacked things together, they weren't really that sharp wide open.
Correct.
But once we stopped down,
which we'll get to,
exactly. Once we stopped down, say 1, 2, or 3 stops, I mean, it sharpened up considerably and got rid of those.
That's kind of that's a really good sort of photo law of physics that we have to keep in mind, is anytime you start introducing things that change the distance between the back of the lens and the sensor, you're going to lose wide open performance. It's just how it goes. So I don't care if it's Leica or any other brand, you're hitting the laws of physics here. So the testing that I did is both wide open and stop down, but you can see that wide open the 100 to 400 natively at 400 is superior to.
It's pretty impressive, actually.
Yeah, I mean, there's like differences in brightness and stuff. Like, ignore that. I didn't have enough time to normalize everything. Sorry. But
I mean, it is. I mean, it's
yeah,
noticeable.
you can see that the 100 to 400.
It's very high performing.
It does a great job, and most telephoto lenses are their weakest at the longest end, at the very extreme.
Sure.
So, and these are, of course, what we're seeing in both cases here, because the 70-200 is at 200 and the 100 to 400 is at 400. And again, we're seeing the 100 to 400 coming, pulling ahead here of the 70-200. Again, this is wide open. Now, what really is interesting is when we start stopping down. Actually, I'm going to compare stop down 70-200 2x against wide open 100 to 400. Not exactly a fair comparison yet, but I wanted to just sort of give you some insight into why we talk about stopping down. Look at that.
And there you go.
Now, the 70-200 is equal to, if not slightly better, definitely slightly better
definitely
than the 100 to 400.
Definitely
so
better.
We're just following that rule, which is as soon as you introduce something in between the lens and the sensor or the film plane, you want to stop down a little bit to maximize performance. Yeah, we're even seeing the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we are seeing that. So then, of course, just to be fair, we can show here.
Now both are stopped down.
Yeah, now both are stopped down. 2 stops. So different apertures, of course, because you're stopping down from different apertures you start with. But now we're seeing pretty much parity between the two.
Excellent, yeah.
So this is a really interesting assessment, which is essentially that if you just pop on a 2x extender and you expect the lens to perform the same as a unextended lens, to make up a word, is not going to be the case wide open. However, you start stopping down 1 or 2 stops, and then you can get that performance back. Of course, you may say, well, Josh, I don't want to stop down 2 stops. Well, then don't get that lens and extender. Do something different. Get one that's native. Because you already are losing 2 stops with the 2x extender.
Sure.
So you're already putting yourself in a situation where you're losing 2 stops of light.
Right.
So these are really important factors to keep in mind, because you have to ask yourself, what are my priorities? Mm-hmm. So just on that, David, in terms of just talking about 70-200 with 2x versus 100 to 400, can you kind of walk us through, in your mind, maybe what some of your use cases would be between either of those two based on what we just talked about?
Yeah. I mean, so let's say we go back to the use case that I'm familiar with, which is taking these things outside, lugging them up mountains and hills and all that stuff, right? In this case, I'm going to say that the 100-400 is probably more useful for general landscape photography than the 70-200.
Yeah.
I mean, just from what I see, the performance of the 100-400 wide open is much more usable than the 70-200 with the 2x wide open, and they're roughly equivalent apertures, wide open with the 2x when we compare them.
Yeah.
So the 100-400 is going to be just a general better performer, and you won't have the added, I would say, component in between. So we don't have that extra length, and we don't have that extra junction between the lens and the camera, where we have to be a little bit more mindful of how we're holding it and how we're mounting it, just in terms of, let's say, ruggedness. Yeah. Because when you're outside, you bump into things. You
bump into things.
People bump into things. I've heard. You have things in your backpack that might be, jostling around if you're keeping the lens mounted. And I'd probably recommend not to keep the lens and the extender mounted to your camera in your backpack because of that potential chance for increased torque. I would put a shorter lens on and leave the telephoto to the side just for safety, in case the bag falls and you don't want to bent mount. I totally forgot about this until right now, but that exact same thing happened to me back in my pre-Leica days. It happened with the Nikon 80-200 2.8 and my old f4, and it was mounted in my bag because they used to make bags where they were situated for those lenses. The bag dropped a couple feet, all was fine until I realized that the lens mount was bent.
Oops! Don't bend your lens mount, people.
Don't bend your lens mount. Been there, done that. But don't recommend it.
Let's come back to the lens.
In terms of ruggedness, I think the 100-400 natively mounted to the SL rather than the 70-200 with the teleextender. And like Josh said, the focus performance is going to be faster with the 100-400 rather than with the 70-200.
Well, I think in that case
was it equal, roughly equal? Similar, right?
70-200 with the 2x extender was a 28. 100-400 was also actually it's equivalent performance.
Okay, so you're not losing anything in terms of autofocus performance. Yeah. But I'd still lean to the 100-400 for landscape photography, and that's just talking in that same focal length range, so the 140-400 versus a 100-400.
Yeah. Well, if I can,
jump in,
for a moment, yeah. So conversely, the 70-200 does two things, but really one important thing, but the 100-400 can never do, which is go to 2.8. Now,
true.
The difference between 2.8 at 200 and f5 at 100 for any type of indoor action photography or portrait work is huge. Yeah. Is huge. I can't understate that enough. It's massive. So I might say to someone, well, if you're really going to spend a lot of time at 400 and you really know you want to be wide open all the time, I would lean more towards 100-400. But if you're going to be shooting an indoor basketball game and then doing some team portraits or doing a wedding that's inside and then have to go outside to have the kids running around, I would say 70-200 because you're getting significantly greater light gathering ability. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, without the extender, the 70-200 is the fastest focusing by a fair margin. Even compared to the 100-400, it's faster.
Yeah.
So if you're shooting in an environment where focus speed is extremely important and you don't need the reach all the time, 70-200 with the 2x in the back.
Well, let's take a look at this. Because we looked at it with the extender, and I'm speaking about it with the extender versus the unextended. But now, you bring up some really good points. So let's take a look at a focal length that overlaps for both of these, unextended versus unextended. Let's say, and to Josh's point, let's say you don't need 400. In fact, 200 is totally fine for your use case most of the time.
Yeah.
So would you be better off with a 100-400 or a 70-200 shooting at 200 millimeter?
Yeah. Give me a second here, Jose, and then I'll...
The great equalizer, right?
The great equalizer. It's exciting. Hold on, I'm just trying to
making this sound way more dramatic than it is.
There's so many photos to come here. Hold on a second. Let's see.
All good?
Let's see. I got yes.
Well,
wide open on both.
Oh wow, that is significant.
Yeah. So you can go to the computer screen, Jose. So this test is an interesting one. This is on the left, the 100-400 at 200 millimeters, no extender, no nothing, at f5.9, which is the fastest it can go at 200 millimeters.
That is wild.
Which is more than 2 stops.
Yeah.
Slower than the 70-200, which of course at 200 is 2.8.
It's 2.3 stops.
Let's take a look. Is it 2.3?
Yeah.
2.3 that you're repeating?
It's something like that.
Okay. Let's take a look. See. And here I was looking at this earlier, and there's a slight contrast difference, which is probably just like lighting or something. They are interestingly similar. And remember, we're talking about 2 1/3 stops more aperture, meaning that much more depth of field, meaning that much more fudge factor from my inevitable mistake on something.
Exactly.
With the 100-400. So you really have to be perfect with the 70-200 at 2.8 because think about how little depth of field you have at f2.8 at 200 millimeters. Very, very little.
Very little.
Let's move around and take a look. Very, very, very similar performance. I would say...
I'd give the slight edge to the 100-400, but we're also looking at f5.9 versus f2.8.
I would agree. I would give the 100-400 a very, very slight edge.
Can you go to the corners?
Yeah, the corners are tough because I have to compare almost the right-hand corners to the left-hand, because there's I was slightly shifted because I'm changing the lens off the camera with each... So I need you to buy me one of those
a rig
in-floor studio tripods, please. But anyway, here we can see a little bit of softness, a little more softness on the 70-200 side, but I think that's just the aperture, the fact that it's 2.8.
Well, I notice something else as we're looking at these, which is I think there's a little bit more vignetting as well on the 70-200 because we are shooting a 200 millimeter at 2.8. And you could see on the wide view here, you could definitely see the natural vignetting. And it's not displeasing.
No,
right?
It's actually quite nice. And this jives with, if you go back and watch our 24-70 episode, which is sort of similar design.
I was just thinking that exact thing.
And we compared it in depth to the 24-90, and this is kind of a similar vibe comparing to the 90-280, which we'll show. They're different in the way they render.
Yes.
One is more M lens-like, where you get a faster focus fall off, from center to the corners and a little more vignetting. So it's fascinating to see that that carries through to the 7200.
It does.
But what I'm most impressed by is how good it is wide open at 2.8. At 200 millimeters, which is also the worst place to be.
Right.
Because we're comparing a lens that's pushed all the way to the maximum at 200 versus the 100 to 400 is not even breaking a sweat because it's only halfway there.
Exactly. Do you happen to have, I don't know if you tested, did you test 100 millimeter?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's take a look at the same comparison before we move on to the stop down version.
Yeah.
I'm curious, wide open versus wide open at 100.
Make sure I find
Yeah,
it.
Josh has to find
There's
it.
so many.
But it is,
This one?
you know, you also said something really interesting, and we're going to get,
There we go.
I think this is going to be more of a point when we are talking about the comparison with 90 to 280.
Yeah.
But you use the analogy of, say, a 35 Summilux versus a 35 Apo Summicron.
Exactly.
And they just have different looks. And these lenses have different looks as well. So let's
Yeah.
pull this
So
up.
what we're looking at now is just to get into the testing a little bit more. I know this is very exciting. Well, again, I find this exciting, and this is like 5 hours of nonstop sweat, blood, and tears. Is on the left, the 100 to 400 at 100, wide open at f5, right? Because it's 100 to 400 at f5 to 6.3, f5. On the right, 7200 at 100, wide open at 2.8. So again, we're stop and a half, give or take.
1 to 2/3.
Let's take a look. See. Now I'm actually seeing a higher performance threshold for the 7200,
Right.
which makes perfect sense because if they were very, very close at the extreme end of the 7200 and the no sweat, I can handle this middle range for the 100 to 400, I would naturally expect the 7200's performance to only get better at the wider ends versus the 100 to 400 to be pretty much the same at the wide end because we're not pushing either of these lenses now.
I mean, it's still, the 100 400 is very impressive.
It's very good, but it's just not as good as the 7200. So if the question is at the same focal length, not at the extremes of either lens, which lens is better? That crown, in my opinion, goes to the 7200, which is just
in corner, you can definitely see it. Yeah.
you know, it's not a huge difference.
They're both high performance.
Yeah, I mean, there's you can see here it is better.
If you look at the numbering there,
Yeah.
but
But again, some of this is also by virtue of the fact that it's tweaked slightly, but it's still,
it's very good.
it is better. It's not so much better that it's like comparing a vintage 35 Summicron to a 35 Apo, but all things being equal, and again,
Sure.
we're at 2.8. It's not easy to make high performance at that kind of aperture.
And you can also see, if you pull that comparison up one more time,
Oh, sorry.
you'll also notice, again, that slight amount of vignetting on the...
Yes, now it's on the left.
you
now.
switched.
I switched them.
There. Nope.
Where's my little? It doesn't matter. Yes. So again,
Small amount of
7200, you're getting a little bit of VR. But now if we go to what I want to show was stop down 2 stops.
Yeah, for sure.
So now we're at 5, 6, and then of course 2 stops on the 100 to 400 is f10, which is absurd.
Can you flip those back? Let's see if we can. I think you have to get out of hit tab. Yeah. Let's see.
Let's see. All my switches are. Where's the little flippy?
Yeah,
do?
where's the thing you
Where's
do?
the flippy do? Why'd you break everything, David?
I didn't touch it.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
I'm sure there's a keyboard shortcut that I just
there is.
can't think of at this exact moment. Apologies. Anyway, on the left, 100 to 400 at 100 millimeters, stop down 2 stops. On the right, 7200 at 100 millimeters, also stop down 2 stops. But again, f10 versus f5.6. Let's take a look. And center performance on both is excellent, but 7200 has the edge.
I think so, too.
Even when the 100 to 400 has way more depth of field to play with because it's at f10 and the same focal length, 7200 is still winning. Let's take a look at the corners.
Do you actually notice the moire on the target? If you zoom back in on the 70-200, it's so
Yeah,
sharp.
a little bit.
It's actually so high resolving. You're getting moire
which
on
is-
the printing.
Yeah.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. All right, let's take a look at the corners here.
Wow.
You know, again, 7200 is still coming out ahead in corner performance, even 2 stops down. So 100 to 400 is no slouch. Now, I probably am not going to be using the 100 to 400 at 100 that often.
Sure.
So this is, you know, here's a bigger difference in this corner here. So again,
But I think
yes,
I think you would definitely use the 70-200 at 100, especially if you're shooting it for portraiture.
for sure.
Yeah.
I did that today.
Right. So I think your 70 to say 135 range is going to be really your most used range as a portrait lens. If when we think about the 70-200 really excelling for that use case.
Yeah, and again, you have the ability to shoot a 2.8, which you simply cannot do. But what I didn't show is how that compares to the 90-280.
Well, okay, at 100.
Yeah.
Let's see.
So let's take a look
You got
at
the 100-400 there.
Oops. My biggie.
Now 2.8. Oh, and we have almost the same aperture range.
Yeah. So on the left, we have 90-280, our legendary APO friend, which is at f2.9 at 100, so pretty close. And on the right, again, 70-200. So let's take
So I'm immediately on the wide shot noticing the lack of vignetting on the 90-280.
So close, but 90-280 has the edge.
Sure.
Especially as you start to get off center.
That's
They're both quite good, but 90-280 is still winning here. Let's see.
How about the corner?
Yeah, 90-280 sharper. Although the gap, in my opinion,
Small.
is smaller between the 70-200 and the 90-280
Sure.
than the 70-200 and the 100-400, in my opinion.
Yeah,
There's still a gap, but it's smaller. Let's take a look at this corner. Yeah, I mean, this corner, you can start to see the real difference in the 90-280 on the left here.
Wow.
70-200 is no slouch, but the 90-280,
Still
look at the
ranks.
detail
Wow,
in
the tape,
in the
yeah.
tape. Yeah, 90-280 is still king. So in terms of you get what you're paying for, yeah, I mean, always diminishing returns as you start to get toward the upper echelon of performance, but it is a better lens.
Well, let's pull up the 200mm again.
Yeah.
Go back to that, and let's take a look at the stop-down performance at 200, as well as the 90-280 comparison.
Yeah, so let's take a look at, well, 200 is interesting because every one of these lenses can get 200 in every combination.
Yeah.
So I will actually show something a little bit different, if I may.
Sure.
I want to show, let's see, I think this. Yes, okay, so this is interesting, right? So this is the 70-200 at 200 both times, except on the left, I have the 1.4x extender, and on the right, I'm just zoomed all the way in. So this is an interesting test because this is going to show you what hurts performance more, using the lens at the extreme of its focal length or using the lens in the middle, but introducing a teleconverter.
Wow,
And
okay.
we're just talking about wide open performance here, right? So let's take a look. Let's see. Immediately you can see no teleconverter, sharper,
Sure.
teleconverter, softer, even though it's the same focal length equivalent.
Interesting.
And even though we're pushing the 70-200 as far as we can at 200, it's still the native lens without an extender
Is always
and
better.
still higher performance.
Yeah.
Not as dramatic in the corners as it is in the center, which is interesting, which makes sense because it's so such a fast aperture. But yeah, if your objective is outright performance, wide open, it's always better to use a lens natively. However, we talked about the benefits of stopping down, which is where, in my opinion, these lenses with converters are supposed to be used.
Swap those again.
Why is it doing this to me?
Because
there we go.
It's already selected.
Okay, fine. You and your logic. So
Logic,
now, the same experience. So on the left, 70-200 at 200 with the 1.4x converter, extender. And on the right, natively at 200. But now we're stopped down 2 stops. Let's take a look. Give it a minute to do its thing. It's churning.
Oh.
Turning.
Oh, still
yeah,
loading.
loaded. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I read it one-to-one previews, but you know how Lightroom works.
Wow.
So now we're talking
Well,
very,
both
very
are-
similar performance,
Which is exceptionally
which
good.
is exceptional. I mean, again, you're recapturing a lot of the lens's original performance when you add the extender and just stop down a little bit. You're not just putting on an extender and then, oh, that's it, there goes all my quality at every aperture. No, you're losing some wide open performance. Obviously, you're gaining focal length, but you're also, that extra performance is still hiding in there.
Sure.
Just have to stop down a little bit. Let's go to the corners here. I mean, here we go. Corners very similar.
I give it the edge for the native.
Yeah, natively still at the edge, still has the edge, but it's a much, much narrower difference now than it was before when we were shooting wide open. So,
Sure. And I think you, just looking at this, it seems that you're getting a little bit higher contrast. And also it does appear to introduce a slight warm color cast using the teleconverter.
that maybe.
Could be the lighting though?
Yeah, it could be the lighting. It could be any one of many thousand different things. But
Okay.
yeah, so for these kind of tests, I'm mainly looking at sharpness.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. But that would be theoretically easy to equalize, I think.
Yeah, obviously.
But what I also want to show, if I can here, is, let's see. Here we go.
What are we looking at now?
Now, we've got, why are you doing this? I have two selected. Hold on. It's mad at me. There we go. Okay. Another interesting test, which is, again, I mentioned that every single one of these combinations goes to 200.
Wow.
So now we have the 70-200 on the right, natively at 200, and the 70-200 on the left with the 2x extender. So really got 100 magnifying 2x. And this is where you're really going to start to see where the native focal length comes out. Just give it a second here.
Is it rendered?
I think so. No,
Wow.
it's not quite. Yeah.
Okay.
So you're losing sharpness
A lot
with
of
the 2x.
sharpness, yeah.
For sure.
Oh, wow.
It's still pretty usable. Contrast is decent. I could, if I added a bit of contrast to this one, which I probably should have done if I was really doing this right. But again, no
Corners,
surprise here. However,
Stop down.
what do we recommend with the extender? Always stop down. Now we're at f11, so you're not really going to be shooting indoors with this combination, I don't think. But let's take a look anyway. Let's give it a second. Still rendering. And go. Look at that.
Wow.
Performance is back.
Yeah.
2 stops down. I'm not going to say that it's as good as it is natively, but it's a lot
It's
closer.
pretty darn close.
It's
Yeah.
a lot closer. Really, really, really usable and good performance when you're considering you're doubling the extension.
Wow. Okay.
Let's do one more and then we'll go look at some questions here. I want to talk about.
Well, did we show 200 at 2 with 90?
That's what I'm going to do next. Yeah. Okay. So now let's talk about the lens that we all know and love at 200, which is the 90-280, versus the 70-200, the new kid in town, at 200. Both at 200 millimeters, both wide open. Now 90-280, because it's not a constant aperture zoom, we're at 3.5, but it is wide open in this case. Let's take a look. Give it a second to render. And go. 90-280 wins.
Yep.
You can definitely notice detail in this in the branding.
You can see the
there.
dots on the printing.
You can see the texture of the paper. 70-200 is doing a good job.
It's
doing a good job. But yeah, wide open performance is what you're paying for with a 90-280. Let's take a look at the corner. Again, nobody's really here. I mean,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
that is.
Yep.
Yeah, but I think we have to look at both corners because again, if it's not totally flat field, yeah, the 90-280 is still coming out ahead. So yeah, if somebody says to me, well, Josh, I can see the 70-200 is considerably less expensive than 90-280. Why? I would just show them this. I would say, this is why. Now, it doesn't mean that the 90-280 is better for everything.
Sure.
Because if I'm doing a portrait and I want that fast focus fall off across the frame and I want to shoot at 2.8, well, 90-280 is not the right tool for that.
Exactly.
90-280 is the wrong tool for that. Even though it is better from a scientific standpoint, it isn't better for that kind of photography.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Let's come back to us.
And did you? Sorry, one other thing.
Yes,
Did we
tell me.
ever look at the 200 of the 100-400 versus the 70-200 stop down 2 stops natively without the adapter?
I don't think so.
I
Let's
think we
do
only showed the wide open.
Let's do it. All right.
So
Hold on.
I am curious about this.
I haven't even looked at all these results. I'm also
So
curious.
well, you have 60 something. Yeah.
I've been a busy man.
All right. So this is stop down 2 stops, right?
Correct. So now we have 100 to 400 on the left, 2 stops down to 200. 70-200 on the right, 2 stops down to 200. Let's take a look at them. Scintillating, I would call this. Scintillating.
I mean, that's a lot closer.
70-200 wins.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the detail in the target here.
Well, that's 100-400 on the left.
Yeah, I meant here. I was saying it here, but I was saying look at it, their equivalency.
Right. It's very close.
100 to 400, it's no slouch. And
No.
again, this lens is a lot less expensive, but 70-200 is still coming out ahead. It's 2 stops down. And again, we're talking f11 versus f5.6. So
Exactly.
it's got a lot more depth of field to play with. So, but again, same thing as I keep saying. It doesn't mean it's better. Depends on what you're trying to do. But I would say if you're going to stop down, just grab the 70-200 instead. If you're going to be around 200 millimeters. But of course, if you need 400, I don't care.
Right,
Good.
right.
700 at 200, it can't do 400 natively. And then we already discussed that if you're going to need 400 a lot, go with the 100 to 400 because it's better performance than the extended 70-200. So these combinations can get a little overwhelming. So let's
a little bit. Let's back
look at
up.
some questions.
Yeah.
And then talk a little bit more in real photography terms, not test target terms.
Yeah, of course.
What these results interpret to in real life use cases.
Absolutely.
Jose, do we have any questions to answer?
Sure. So we can go back to the questions from earlier, I guess.
Sure. Fire away.
So it says here, for an Alaska wildlife trip, what would you recommend? 2x extender with the 70-200 or 100-400 with and without the 2x extender?
I would say 100 to 400
Yeah.
natively, unless there was going to be a portrait component. But that'd probably bring like a 90 APO or something.
Yeah, I don't think there would be. You're talking. You said Alaska wildlife trip.
Yeah.
This plus the extender, and I'd probably recommend the 1.4 extender for the 100-400 because you're already starting at such a small aperture that you're better off only losing one stop and then being able to still stop down.
Yeah, if I was gonna go, I would probably bring the 1.4x and the 2x extender just to have them
Just in
both
case.
because they're not that big.
And you never know. And the thing is about bears. I assume if you're going to Alaska, you want to photograph bears.
Yeah.
The thing about bears is generally don't want to get too close, especially when they're hungry. You kind of want to be a little bit of a safe distance away from that kind of thing. And if you're shooting birds like eagles and things like that, they're generally not perched right next to you. So for pure wildlife, and I'm going to group in, and this gets to our specific use cases. Alaska, Africa, going on safari and shooting from open jeeps and bright daylight. I think the 100-400 with one or both of the teleconverters is going to be your best option because you need that reach. You really need that reach. And if you're shooting natively and 400 is enough for you, being able to do that without the teleconverter means that you can shoot wide open and get a very sharp result, especially in the center, which is where your subject's going to be.
But although, I don't know how, if you're doing that photography during the day, again, it's going to depend on what else you're going to be doing.
Yeah.
Because the 70-200
is more flexible.
Right. And again, if you're shooting in bright daylight and you can afford to stop down, your performance differences become negligible.
Sure.
But at that point, you may as well just get the 100-400 and then stop down with the 1.4x and get even more reach. Because with animal stuff, you could never have a long enough lens. No matter how long your lens is, you're always going to wish you had more reach.
When we were in Patagonia on our Patagonia workshop, everyone was staked out on a hill with looking at a puma. And this puma, well, one, it's like beige in a beige environment. And you're like, is there a puma? And the thing is, that was in a national park in Chile. And by law, you have to be, I think, 100 meters away, which is pretty far away.
Really far, yeah.
And the thing is, I had a 90-280. I had to crop the living daylights out of this image to even see the puma. By the time I was done, I had like 10 megapixels out of it, and this is out of an SL3.
Yeah.
280 simply didn't cut it.
Yeah.
And there, not only the 100-400, I would throw the converter on there and actually get a decent shot of the puma because I didn't get one.
Somebody had asked about that, about cropping versus extending.
No,
and extending is always going to win,
Yeah.
especially if you can stop down, but even if you can't. I mean, we're talking about serious cropping. So 2x cropping, giving up half your resolution.
I did more than that.
Which you did more than that? No, I mean, your extending is always better because then you could crop even further.
Exactly.
I mean, I would encourage you to test this kind of stuff for yourself as well because everyone's use case is going to be a little bit different. But for me, I'd always rather have optical extension, even if I know I'm losing a bit of sharpness wide open with an extender compared to how much I'm going to lose when I start cropping. Because when you crop, especially when you crop heavily, you can't crop creatively because you're cropping just to get more reach. And also your ability to edit the file is degraded because you're just giving up data.
Exactly.
So I would always take the teleconverter over crop. Obviously, in a pinch like David, you do what you got to do.
You do what you got to do.
Exactly. Any other questions, Jose?
Yep. Let's see. What's the maximum aperture with the 2x extender on a 100-400?
So, well, let's check it out. I mean, I can look at images, but it's more fun to just do it. So give me the 100-400 and let's... This is the fun part, having all the toys in front of me. Here we go. So we got it, 100-400. Here. All right, so now I've got it on the SL3. Let's take a look.
What do you got?
So at 100 millimeters...
You can even do the overhead view.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's true. Just careful. I'm losing all my things. Let's see. I'll move some stuff out of the way. Okay. Can we get it? Oh, we already have it. Okay.
Yep.
So we're at F10. That's wide open. I can stop down to F45 if I feel so compelled.
Please don't do that.
And then if I zoom in to 400 millimeters, F13. So F10 to F13 are the maximum apertures of the 100-400 when using the 2x extender. So yeah, you're not going to be doing any low light, bokeh-licious portraits with this thing in the 2x extender.
No, what I would recommend in that case is, especially if you're shooting, let's say, on an SL3 or an SL2S, I would bump that ISO up, especially if you're shooting in the daytime and, we call it fat light, where it's not low light at all, but you have full daylight. I'd bump it up to at least 1600 ISO, if not maybe 2000, 2500, or 3200 ISO, because, Josh, you got to say it,
Well, I'll always take a grainy picture over a blurry picture. So there we go.
Right. So especially if you're shooting animals and action and things, thankfully there is image stabilization both in body and also all three of these telephoto options. We didn't cover that. All three of them have optical image stabilization in the lens that works in concert with the body. That's SL3, SL2, SL2S with in-body image stabilization. And if you're using it on an older SL601, all three of these lenses do give you optical stabilization as well.
Jose.
Cool. All right. Is it possible to zone focus the lens, the 70-200?
No.
No. There's no depth of field. Yeah, that's would be,
Yes,
would be,
infinity to infinity.
I mean, yeah. So no, that wouldn't be practical.
So the first question was also, how does quality at 200 compare to that of at 70? And also, how much quality is lost with the teleconverter?
Well, we
covered the second one, which is you do lose, I would say you lose about a stop and a half of performance. So you just have to stop down by 1 to 2 stops to get that performance back. You're going to get better results at the wide end of any zoom, long zoom, than you would at the long end. So yeah, 70 will be better than 200. Wide open, again, stop down, basically the same. Yeah.
Okay. So the last question was also comparing a couple of lenses. He says that he has the 24-90, and then he's asking about performance between 70-200 and 90-280. But I think that's also a good question because a lot of people have the 24-90 and they've had it for years. So would it make sense to just jump to 90-280 or maybe 70-200?
Well, I'll ask you this question, David.
Yeah.
Well, I'll rephrase that. That's a great question. If you owned a 24-90 on your SL2 or your SL3,
I do.
You didn't have a telephoto lens and you wanted some extra reach, how would you decide between the 70-200 2.8 that just came out, maybe with an extender, maybe not, or the 90-280 that's been out forever and we are familiar with?
I think it comes down to priorities, and also what you're going to shoot, right? So here's our best answer ever. It depends.
We really haven't said that in a while, so
we haven't said that.
You gotta bust it out, you know.
So you gotta dust it off, keep it fresh. For me, I've gone through this thought process too, because now there's all these options.
Yeah.
And the 70-200 is appealing. It is a little smaller. It does get to 2.8 all the way through. It does focus closer, or well, it focuses almost as close, but let's call it fair. And it works with the telephoto extender, and I think before we really put it through its paces, before you had your findings on the teleconverter and really like concrete examples, which is I think pretty eye-opening.
Yeah.
I had this dream. I had this fantasy. Yes. It was a lens fantasy, which was I could take this. Oh, you have it on there.
Oh, yeah.
I could take a 70-200 2.8, a 1.4 converter, messing up things, and a 2x converter up here, and I could have a 70-200 2.8, a 100-280 f4, and a 140-400 5.6. By just putting these in my bag.
Yeah.
And we were talking about weight limited trips like going to Africa where you're flying around in bush planes, going to Greenland where you're flying in tiny little planes.
Yeah.
I go a lot of places where you're flying in tiny little planes and they have weight restrictions. I can put these just in my pockets, in coat pockets, and then just have this lens rather than taking other lenses. And in theory, that sounded extraordinarily appealing.
Yeah.
More so than the 90-280 because I would be able to cover everything from 70 to 400, with this great flexibility. Seeing the results, though, I think that my personal taste, especially primarily as a landscape photographer who very occasionally has wildlife opportunities, and I might in other scenarios have more or less wildlife opportunities, but generally speaking, I'm shooting pictures of mountains and trees and things that don't move. I probably would still opt for the 90-280. Same reason that I opt to keep using the 24-90 rather than the 24-70, even though the 24-70 is 2.8 all the way through and lighter. Because from my work at least, I'm looking for that SL perfection. I'm looking for that corner to corner, absolute performance, every aperture, every zoom setting, every focus distance. And I'm I'm the one who shoots a 35 APO Summicron on M for that same reason. I want that absolute performance.
Yeah.
That being said, I'm going to actually throw this question to Jose.
Oh, okay.
Because Jose doesn't shoot those kind of images. Jose shoots mostly people. He shoots events, right? And you're shooting in lower light conditions than I usually shoot in. So, Jose, what would you choose on this across the smorgasbord of Leica zooms?
Definitely 70-200. That's like a must-have lens for like weddings and events and things like that. But I think most importantly, because of the constant 2.8 aperture. So, I just don't think you need that much reach, but you do need that fast aperture because, like you said, it's lower light environments, it's people. You prefer that depth of field than having like a 400 or, past 200. Like unless you're shooting in a huge venue, I don't think you need something longer than 200. So, yeah, definitely 70-200 is a must.
Yeah,
for sure.
and I think.
Okay. And then Josh,
Well,
I'm going to throw it back to you.
Yeah, I mean,
What do you think?
I'm a long time 9280 user, but I am very excited to bring the 7200 to a car show because I don't usually, at least lately, I haven't been using. As events have gotten more crowded, I can't use the 9280 at 280 anymore, which is what I used to do. It's usually between like 150 and 180 now. So to be able to use a 7200 to have an even faster maximum aperture, even more M lens rendering for me.
Sure.
And I would 100% throw the 1.4x in the bag with me because if I'm doing automotive work and I switch between cars that are kind of stationary to like cars around either on the track or just like driving on roads, I'm going to stop down anyway because I just can't shoot that stuff wide open. It doesn't work. And B, I just want that extra reach. So I would bring nowadays for my automotive work, I think the 7200 with the 1.4x extender. I wouldn't say I'd bring it 100% of the time. There may other be times where I'd have a 9280 instead, but certainly, and especially if I was only going to bring one lens.
Yeah.
Because the 9280 is very difficult to use as your only lens.
True, because it's 90.
Exactly. Where 70, even though it's only 20 millimeters, is a lot easier to use. And I've talked about this when we talked about 75 Noctilux versus 90 Summilux in the M line, where I said I can go out with the 75 Noctilux as my only lens. I really can't with the 90.
Sure.
So it's the same concept here as I can go out with just the 7200 and get away with a lot of shots.
It's 70 is pretty close to 50.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I think that is another big advantage. And of course, the additional autofocus speed, 30% faster than a 9280 or whatever I said, 20 something,
Sure.
30%, whatever it is, faster autofocusing speed than 9280. So for what I do, which is like, capturing cars or people or animals or whatever, that tracking or even just that single lock on focus speed is really, really convenient. So I have not had a chance to take the 7200 to an automotive event. I will next month. So I'm pretty excited to throw my Polarizer on there and see what it can do because it's a focal length that I've used to own in other systems, like a lot of other action sort of sports news type photographers, events photographers. And I'm very excited to see what it can do in the, on the SL3. I think it's going to be pretty sweet. So, then, of course, the 100-400 is still there for when I need that extra reach, especially wide open.
Right. I still think the 100-400 makes the most sense if you are shooting wildlife specifically. Wildlife,
And also,
or could be also sports that's a little further away.
Yeah. And also price point, if we talk about that, the 100-400 and the 7200 are very competitively priced.
Sure.
Excuse me, especially 100-400, it's like in the US, like $22.95. I think I did the math, and you can get the 100-400, the 7200, and both extenders for almost the same price as the 9280 new.
Wow.
Yeah. So if your number one criteria is not at maximum wide open performance, which for some people it will be and for some people it won't, then if it's not and you're looking for maximum flexibility, fastest autofocus speed, the most reach possible, all those things, then and you had a budget of whatever the 9280 costs and you're looking at I have this money, or do I want to get the 9280 or do I want to get these four components? I could argue either way, but I'm now arguing for myself of those four. I'm not saying you'd bring all four things with you all the time.
But having the arsenal.
Yes, having that in your toolkit, in your bag, or in your, not your bag, but in your
kit.
possible kit, could give you a lot of flexibility.
It's true.
And if I owned a 100-400 now, I don't think I would get rid of it for a 7200 just because the price point is so good.
Sure.
It's almost like, just nice to have that native 400 millimeter reach. That lighter weight, that smaller size, just to have it in the bag, when you want to go out compact.
I agree.
Yeah, we covered a lot right now.
Did we Did you cover? You did. You covered 400 versus 400, right?
Yes.
I just want to make sure that
Yeah,
we
yeah, there's
talked about the
probably-
longer end.
Yeah, we talked about 400 versus 400.
We started with that, and then we went to 200 and 100.
We didn't
right?
talk about 280.
Okay, let's look at
We
that.
do 280.
Is there any? Well, we should also see how it performs at the longest. Go back to your list there,
Yeah.
because you have testing at 800 even. Obviously,
Well-
there's only one.
Yeah, we could. I mean, at 800.
This is most extreme case.
Yeah.
This isn't 70 to 200.
No.
This is 100 to 400
with the 2x. Yeah.
with a 2x.
This is definitely where you lose the most quality. Although, if you need to get 800, no, that's
all
it.
you- yeah.
So you can go to the computer, Jose, if you want. There we go. This is 800 wide open. It's rare that you ever say wide open at f13. That doesn't come out of my mouth very often. And you can see the test target. I mean, I was against the wall in the store. I couldn't get any further back. I mean, it's okay. You're a little bit biased because it's so enlarged.
I mean, it's picking up a lot of detail.
But if you stop down, it gets quite a bit better.
F25,
2 stops down to f25.
make it stop.
Oh, that is a lot of aperture numbers there. So I don't think I would spend a lot of time at 800 in an environment like this. But if you're out shooting wildlife, you'll be very, very glad to have the ability to shoot 800. I just hope it's super, super sunny where you are because you're going to be shooting at f13 if you're wide open. So that's just kind of something to consider. If we go to 560 though, we could see, where are we here? There we go. This is where we can really see the benefits of the 1.4x over the 2x in terms of slightly less loss of performance, at least wide open. Let's see here. So this is just using the 100 to 400 to getting to 560 either with the 1.4x converter or the 2x extender. I mean, they're very similar, although the 1.4x has a slight edge because it's just less glass. But again, this wide open, if you stop down, these pretty much go away. But since
It's not bad.
since there's only one lens that covers that focal range, you know, it's not like you're choosing between different lenses here. You're just getting the 100 or 400 and that's it. But I did want to show, let's see here, 90-280. Bear with me. There it is. If I may. Oh, I love how this, like the name of the lens is getting so long you can't even. So this is an interesting comparison because now we're at 280 at f4 with both lenses.
We swap these because we want to. Yeah, there we go. So the 70 to 200.
You can see they're a little bit askew because there's so many different moving parts here that it's hard to get them to line up perfectly. But again, talking about you get what you pay for with a 90-280, well, here you go. That's a huge difference in performance. I mean, there's no other way to slice it.
No, that is massive.
Yeah, I mean, that is a big difference in performance. So the 90-280 is still the image quality king. There's no doubt about it. I have no problem saying that because it's also like twice the price of the 700.
Exactly.
So it's not like, it's not like there's nothing there. Wide open is just, it can't be beat. It is.
Stop down.
Stop down. I think I missed the focus on this test. Let me see.
Oh,
I know. Even me, the testing king in these environments, I learned a lot from this experience, which is I wish I had had more time,
sure.
but that's okay.
We always wish we had more time.
No.
But Leica,
No, this one was fine. Okay.
Leica, if you're listening, send us stuff earlier.
Yeah, right? Yeah, okay. Here we go. Yeah, so 90-280 is still coming out ahead wide open.
Yeah.
Or excuse me, stop down 2 stops.
You would expect.
90-280. I mean, again, it's just a really, 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 really sharp lens. Like, we've been saying this for years, and that hasn't changed.
Yeah, I mean, I can still say this, right? Which is, you can come back to, yeah, I could still say that when the 90-280 first came out in, 2016?
I think 2016, yeah.
At that time, I didn't have anything to compare it to except for the best R lenses, the 180 APO-Elmarit, the 2.8, which in my mind was kind of a benchmark lens, and I compared the 90-280 against it, and the 90-280 destroyed it at 180. And like Josh said, testing is really hard.
Yeah.
I redid that test twice because I was doubting my testing methodology, and I said, I must have screwed something up. There's just no way that a zoom lens can outperform one of the best APO prime lenses ever made, except it did.
Yeah.
Right? So the 90-280 still holds that top spot. It is the best telephoto option that Leica has ever made.
The highest performance.
The highest performance.
Best is not always best. Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
the highest performing telephoto lens that Leica has ever made. Period. Full stop.
Yeah.
Right?
I want to talk about a few more things, but before I do, I brought another cool, I like to highlight some of our cool used gear.
Not you.
So I know, right? So before we get into the next topic, which I want to talk about best practices
Yes.
for getting the most out of these lenses.
I think you also have some announcements and housekeeping stuff too.
I do. So let's get out to some. Let's just get off topic for a minute and have a little bit of fun. First, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping. A couple things coming up if you want to hang out, especially with me. Number one, what's today? Saturday? Next Friday,
Saturday.
the 27th. Jose, you can go to the computer if you want. Is our next gallery opening at Leica Store Miami. It is Ashley Stoll, who is a photographer based in Los Angeles, who did this incredible work, sort of going around LA, trying to find like the LA nostalgia, the old days, and it's awesome. So the gallery opening is a gallery opening, gallery talk, book signing. We have food, we have booze. Come hang out with us. That's this Friday, the 27th at 7 p.m. That's the first thing. The next thing that's happening is, you've heard me talk about this before, LSI, Leica Society International, the preeminent Leica community and organization on the planet. They do a couple of different meetings every year, culminating with the annual meeting, which is the biggest and coolest event. This year, it is in Los Angeles from October 24th to the 26th. They're going to have incredible speakers. They get executives from Leica, amazing, amazing, amazing photographers who give presentations, photo walks, you name it. I will be there. Kirsten will be there. David, unfortunately, will not be there. So if you have the opportunity, there are still spots available. You can go to LeicaSocietyInternational.org and sign up. If you have any questions about it, or if you're going to be there, reach out to me. Let me know. We can grab a coffee or beer or whatever. I have a blast at these events. If a lot of you watching this show have probably hung out with me at past events, if you know how much fun it is. This one also, there's a trip to the Peterson Automotive Museum. So if you want to know what it's like to see me geeking out over like some of the most insane cars on the planet, and also teaching you how to photograph them in a challenging environment, that alone, in my humble and totally unbiased opinion, is worth going to LA for. So that's October 24th to the 26th. Jose, can you drop this stuff in the chat too?
Yeah, it's already there.
Awesome. And then the last event I want to talk about is November 1st through 2nd. We've done this twice with them already. So KH, they buy everything. They're big used camera business store, whatever. They are coming to Leica Store Miami November 1st and 2nd, and you can bring your gear to sell them, the equipment, either for money, or if you get a store credit with us, you get an extra 10%. So if you've got some stuff collecting dust around the house you want to get rid of, you don't want to deal with boxing it up and shipping it, and you're anywhere in Florida, come to the store the 1st or the 2nd, sell the gear to KEH, trade the gear to KEH, get an extra 10% bonus, and trade with us. So that is another great opportunity happening in the Leica store. So again, we've got gallery opening coming up this Friday. We got Leica Society International annual meeting in October. And then we've got the KH event November 1st and 2nd. So yes, hopefully I'll see some of you at either all or both of these.
And I would also ask if you could pull up the workshops.
Oh yes, we have workshops, yes.
We listed a whole bunch of new
So Peter has dumped not all, but a lot of 2025 workshops on the calendar. Now they're selling out fast, but we've got, that's sold out. We got one spot left for printing, which is this year. We've got Iceland, Portugal, Patagonia,
Faroe Islands.
and Faroe Islands, which is starting to fill up, coming up this next year. So if you want to travel the world with us, make insane photos, meet cool Leica people, see amazing things,
Watch me drop things.
watch David drop things down the sides of mountains and such. That's the way. I'm a little bit jealous. I want to go on one of these, but it'll happen eventually.
Eventually.
So, anyway, a lot of cool stuff coming up. All of it is on LeicaStoreMiami.com. So if you want to get a sense of what events and workshops we have, you can check it out there. But now that we've done the housekeeping stuff, I want to show, of course, I brought a cool thing to show.
What did you bring?
And it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. It rarely does, I guess.
Why would it? Why would it?
But, I'm going to grab it. It is bubble wrap. No, it's inside the bubble wrap, okay? I happen to be a fan of regular things that are regular but also look cool. And what I mean by that is what's in this bag. All right, so if you're watching this show and you're a Leica enthusiast, you're familiar with the M240. That camera was a game changer for Leica. It came out in 2012. It's the first digital M with live view, EVF, really good high ISO performance and super modern interface and usability. And that camera had a very long life.
Did.
5 years plus. In fact, even after its successor, the M10 came out, Leica surprised all of us with a sort of finale siren song to the M240 generation. And Jose, we go to the top down with this. This, is that sharp? Yes. This is the ME Type 240, which shockingly came out in 2019, 7 years after the original M240 came out. And I am obsessed with this camera for a few reasons. Number one, super rare. Production is rumored to be around 700. I don't think Leica officially stated that. Number two, it combines all my favorite parts of the 240 and the MP240. So from the 240, you get the Leica dot, you get the general sort of Leica styling. But from the MP240, you get, number one, the most important improvement, which was the larger internal memory from 1 gigabyte to 2 gigabytes. So you can shoot like 30-something images in a row, which was, back then it was a big deal. So you get that change. And of course, you get the no Leica big M here, which I just like that cleaner look. But the most obvious difference is it has this really unique sort of anthracite gray, it almost looks textured finish that Leica has never used on any of their other cameras. They've done other they had an original ME, they had an SE, but they were a different gray altogether. This is a really unique paint. It's a brass body. So if you want something fun from the 240 generation that represents the pinnacle, the most polished iteration of that camera that's both rare and beautiful and not $10,000, I just listed this on the site. It just came back from customer care where I got cleaned and calibrated. And I just happen to think this is one of the most underappreciated modern digital M's. It really flies under the radar. Really, people just don't like to talk about it. I don't know why. I guess because it came out so late and it kind of just came and went because it sold out very quickly. So if you want something fun, you want a cool digital M, you like the 240 generation, check out the ME240 on our website, and Jose can drop a link in the chat.
That is pretty cool.
Yes.
I like that gray.
Yeah.
And especially with the contrasting silver
And
dial.
we just don't see them that much. They just don't come up in our world that much. So
I haven't seen one for
really,
years.
really cool to see this.
And that clean, too.
Yeah, this one's a really, really good shape. And it's got the box and all that stuff, which I didn't bother to bring because it's just too much to carry. Anyway, David, I want to talk now, because we got time, right?
About technique.
Oh, yeah.
Technique?
I want to talk about technique.
Yeah.
How do you, given these struggles we've talked about, right?
Yes.
Depth of field, long lenses, magnifying motion, even with stabilization. What are the techniques that you like to use, both handheld and when you're on a tripod, you can go base ISO.
Sure.
You do use to get the most out of these big long lenses?
Absolutely. I mean, no pressure.
While I wrap this up.
I'm going to make 5 points now. Let's go to my outline. So there's a couple things. I think we can talk about things from the setting side of the camera, but we can also talk about physical things.
Yes.
So let's start with the physical things. One, if you're hand holding, again, I kind of touched on this, and I'm not going to demonstrate because it just makes me cringe. But don't hold the camera like this and have the lens sticking out the front because you have no. Actually, I will demonstrate with a not telephoto lens.
Please don't break anything on the air.
Don't break anything.
I appreciate that.
So if you have this, and you can see this is not a stable platform for shooting. Even if you have a short lens, you should be in this, kind of elbows tucked situation, right? And I always demonstrate this very simply, that each hand should be completely balanced onto itself. So if you have one hand on the camera, let's say one hand, it should be stable in the way that you're holding it because you're bracing against your body. If I'm bracing on the other side, I should be able to balance equally well, and you find the midpoint of the camera so that it balances, center of gravity. That way, you're not pushing against it. Also minimizes your fatigue as well as you're holding things for a long time. So if you can find the center...
Are you saying I'm out of shape?
I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything.
Right. It was implied.
It was implied. So it minimizes fatigue as well because, see, I don't have to over-grip the camera. And that's another thing. Over-gripping the camera, squeezing too tight. If you squeeze something, here, Jose, switch to the overhead, right? I'm going to squeeze, and I'm not purposely trying to shake this, but if I squeeze really, really tight, you'll see the camera starts shaking. If I relax, the camera is much, much more stable. So that's just a simple technique. Hold it less, lighter. and the way to hold it lighter is to be better balanced. This isn't just for telephoto, but it makes more of a difference in telephoto because the longer your focal length gets, the more you're going to see motion. So again, kind of tuck your elbows in like that. Find the center of gravity with your lens hand, and grip the camera very lightly with the other hand, and try to just be relaxed. Drop your shoulders, relax. Also, your stance. I can't show you because I can't stand up.
You want to stand on the tail?
But instead of just standing with your feet close together like this, you know, put one foot back, 1 foot forward, and lean forward just ever so slightly into that athletic stance, because you just have a much more stable platform when you're hand holding. If you're going to be shooting for a long time, let's say you're going to be shooting sports, on the sideline, you're shooting American football or international football, or basketball game, or you're shooting cars going around a track. Your best option there is going to be to use a monopod, like all sports photographers. Josh, I'm sure you had a collection of monopods.
Yes. I never
hanging everywhere, right?
Yes.
And there, it's just going to give you that stable platform and replace your left hand so that you can just focus on the panning action. Because typically, if you're shooting something on a field, you're shooting players on a field, you're really only doing this motion. Once you find a level, you're not doing this. So the monopod really has some usefulness there.
Yeah, if you're going to do a lot of telephoto work with, especially the 100 to 400, just invest in a really nice, lightweight carbon fiber monopod. Throw the real, like a very small real-right stuff or Arca compatible head on it, like a little something basic, and just keep it with you.
Yep.
You know, you can tether it to the bottom of your bag. You can stick it in your car, like having an umbrella.
And you can use it as a walking pole when you're...
Yeah. Or if you have to fight off a bear with that, you could do that.
Carbon fiber is probably not going to help you.
I'm just saying, I don't know.
It would just annoy it, I think.
Anyway, just really, really good to have around for that kind of work.
Another thing is when we talk about our... And let me put the 70 to 200 on.
There we go.
So this gives a real... I was using a 24 to 70 for this. Now, this is much heavier. This whole kit weighs about 6 pounds? 5.5, 6 pounds?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Okay, so there's a couple techniques here that I like to use. Some people like to use the foot, but you'll find it sort of digs into your hand. A nice way, if you just want to have the lens, is I spin the plate around the top, the foot around the top, if I'm hand holding, and then it allows me just a more comfortable place to set my hand.
Yeah.
And again...
Yeah, better than taking it off because you're going to lose it.
You'll lose it, right. So you can see, again, look, one hand, and I've got the center of gravity of the lens, and you'll notice that tends to put the lens just about in reach where I can turn the zoom ring. And then as I balance, and now I can operate the zoom just like that. You could probably see in the overhead there, but just like that. And again, tucking my arms in, and you notice I don't have to hold the lens, or the camera rather, very firmly, or the lens. I'm barely touching both to maintain control over the camera, just with my elbows tucked in, finding that center of gravity. If you're holding too close back to the camera, it's going to tip forward. If you're holding too far out, it's awkward and it's going to lean back on you. So you want to find that center of gravity. And the lens balances really well. And in fact, I'd say most Leica lenses balance extremely well. If you find that this maybe isn't as comfortable, that your hand doesn't rest naturally, another little trick is to change the center of gravity in the camera, which is one of our tips. And you'll notice, again, if you look at a lot of professional sports photographers, they really love hand grips. It's for two reasons. One, and I can't put it on this camera. Wait, is this?
That's all through grip.
Oh, but this one has a plate on it.
Oh, put it on that one. Just take a little cover off.
Yep. There we go.
Because if you lose that, I'll be very
well. I'm going to put it where it belongs.
It's hard to get out of it if you put it in wrong.
That's true.
I don't trust you to do it right. So
thank you. I really appreciate you, Josh.
I have the utmost confidence you should do this.
Okay, so I'm putting the hand grip on, and especially if I don't think this one has a battery in it.
No, it doesn't.
No, I'm going to steal the battery from here. And the battery isn't for power necessarily; it's for counterweight. I like that it takes a second battery in here. And now I'm going to take the same setup. Thank you. Scalpel.
Suction.
Yeah. Okay.
He's doing great. He's doing great, folks. The struggle is much more amusing in here in the studio in real life than it is on YouTube, I'm sure.
Oh, because I'm backwards?
Because you got to turn the foot around, yeah.
Oh, oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, the lens is upside down.
Here's the downside of turning the tripod foot. Just so you know, these shows are not scripted when these
Okay.
kinds of things happen.
So now, what's really interesting is the center of gravity is now back here. Because what I've done is by putting the grip on and having a battery in it, it pulls it all the weight closer to me. And now I can actually hold it much, much closer, which is pretty fantastic, actually. This feels amazing. You should actually try this. And,
this does feel nice.
but
I mean, I've also come from the pro body camera generation where you always had a vertical grip. Because also for doing
football
any
player.
kind of vertical stuff with a lens like this, as soon as you go like this, you lose that ability to keep everything tucked in.
You can't,
But
right.
with the vertical grip, you can do exactly what David is saying, even when you're shooting vertically. So you can still have that stability, which is really nice. And the SL3 grip is really it's pretty nice.
It's an improvement.
Yeah, they did a good job.
Pretty
on that.
nice. It's
And
nice and sturdy.
what's cool is if you plug the camera into power, it's smart enough to know you have a grip attached, and it knows if there's a battery in there, and it always charges the grip battery first.
Yeah, pretty
So
cool.
if you are always charging a USB-C, you can leave the grip on all the time because it's always going to drain and charge the grip battery first.
Yes.
And then it will charge the internal battery second.
Pretty neat.
Yeah, this is
That feels good, right?
yeah, this is really. And it had the joystick. I mean, this is a nice.
But feel how well balanced
Yeah,
that is.
this is nice. It's a sweet combo.
Not bad.
I'm like super excited to get out and shoot car stuff with this because
right. And
this is fun.
the thing is, I probably would stick to this method, which is an L bracket. I use an L bracket because I shoot landscape photography and I'm on a tripod a lot with a lot of other lenses.
Yeah.
It's not as big a deal to have an L bracket with this lens because we have a rotating tripod foot, right? So I can be on a tripod without an L bracket and with a hand grip. So if you are going to shoot a lot of telephoto work, either on a monopod, a tripod, or handheld, I really, I think you owe it to yourself to try it with the hand grip.
And top tip: if you can't afford an extra battery for there, just put a bunch of sand in there and weigh it down.
Don't put sand in there.
It's like having a sandbag. In your
Don't
camera.
put sand in there.
All right, I'm just saying.
Okay. Yeah, don't encourage them. Don't encourage the people. So yeah, this would be a really nice setup. And the funny thing is, the grip itself, when you take it off, doesn't weigh very much.
Yeah.
But it's enough to pull that center of gravity back.
Yeah.
And really give you a much more substantial
I think
platform.
if it just to sort of
I mean, look, I like
compact that down. If you're going to do a lot of telephoto work with any of these lenses we're talking about, the grip with a spare battery in it is, I'm not going to say it's a must-have because everyone's ergonomics are going to be different, but you owe it to yourself to try it at least if you can, because you may find it revelatory in the way that it handles, like David just did.
it's shockingly different in terms of where that balance falls.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the mechanical things.
Let's talk about settings a little bit.
Let's talk about.
And I can cover this a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
because you did a lot of this in your testing as well.
Yeah, so, my testing necessitates obviously a best case scenario, meaning best focus, least amount of motion blur, most solid, best case scenario for everything. So there's a few things that I do.
The wall didn't move?
The wall, well, I'm gonna talk to the contractor. There's a few things that I do to get what I hope are the best results. And now you're not going to be doing most likely test target shooting, but if you're doing landscape work or any kind of tripod mounted or something like fine art reproduction, you're going to essentially have the same requirements that I did. Number one, sturdy tripod, sturdy head. That sounds obvious, but when you start getting up in weight, especially as you start increasing the weight and increasing the focal length, it becomes that much more important to have a very, very solid head and legs combination. Because if you don't, you will regret it. I was traveling recently and I had a 180 and I didn't want to bring a check bag, so I had a little tripod and I just gave up.
I mean, I could certainly use this example from countless workshops that we've led because the most beautiful places, I understand. It's a lot of flights to get there. Yeah. There is often weight limitations. Yeah. There's size of luggage limitations. There's the limitation of knowing that you have to climb and walk however many kilometers with the weight on your back. And you'd so much rather have a tiny little, Peak Design tripod or something like that you're not going to feel every step that you take.
Yeah.
But you also went all this way.
Yeah.
Spent all this effort and investment to get to this place, to shoot the beautiful things. And the most beautiful places have the worst weather. That's what makes them beautiful. So when the wind is blowing in your face, and especially with a long lens, and it's just shaking it like a leaf in the breeze because your tripod or your head or both are too small, why did you even bother, right? So show up,
Yeah.
bring a stable tripod. It is one of the most essential things for landscape photography.
Anyway,
Back to Josh.
aside from that,
Settings.
the next, right. So I talked about one tool, I'll talk about another tool, then a couple settings. Another very useful tool is an obvious one. It's been around forever, is a cable release. There is a remote release for the SL3 specifically. I think, well, I guess SL2 and SL3, sorry, I take the same one.
They do.
16066 is the Leica catalog number. This is a must-have because those long lenses, especially longer than 200 millimeters, it takes a long time for it to stop, even on a good tripod when you touch it. So I always have my cable release handy when I'm doing that kind of work. In terms of settings, there's a couple that I always use. Number one is obviously self-timer. You can do now 2 seconds or 6 seconds on the SL3. I was using 2 seconds until I got over 400 millimeters, so 516, 800.
Sure.
I put on 6 seconds because it just magnifies every little motion. The other setting that I use is I switch the shutter from hybrid or mechanical to electronic because electronic shutter, by its very nature, ensures there is nothing that's moving inside the camera when you take the photo. Now, there are limitations to electronic shutter. You can't go longer than 1 second.
Right.
1 second.
Yep.
It has limitations in certain lighting because it may have banding. So just be aware of that. In my case, I was using controlled LED lighting, so it didn't matter. If you're in daylight, doesn't matter. But just using the electronic shutter ensures you're not going to get any shutter shake, which essentially you can't eliminate any other way because it's not shaking that's coming from the tripod or the lens. It's coming from the inside of the camera.
Exactly.
So that's another setting that I definitely rely on. And lastly is I actually turn off image stabilization. This is probably more of an old school way of thinking. I would guess Leica's probably
They've addressed it,
figured this out, but my experience is just from the classical side of things is I always turn off stabilization as soon as I mount the camera on a tripod because I don't want the camera to get confused and try to compensate or overcompensate for something that's not happening because it's not moving.
Sure.
So I use the self-timer, I use the electronic shutter, and I turn off image stabilization, combine that with a cable release and a sturdy tripod, and you will dramatically increase your results. These are the kind of things that I'm grateful for that I discover when I'm doing testing, because it means when I get out into the field, I don't have to figure it out then.
Right.
You know, I was doing a lot of testing, and I'm running back and forth to my computer in this testing phase, checking my results, looking how things are coming together, seeing where I'm messing up, seeing where I could change things. You and I talked about this as well.
Yep.
And that process, even though in this case it's for the sake of a YouTube show, that process for anyone getting into a new kit, especially one that's very specific like this telephoto stuff, is a really, really good way to figure out those things and make those mistakes in a controlled, risk-free environment versus going to Patagonia, going to the Faroe Islands and realizing, oh, I should have used 6 seconds on timer instead of 2 seconds, or I should have used electronic shutter instead of mechanical.
Always
or
better.
whatever.
It's always better to test these things out in a low risk environment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. And I get excited
and know
about
the limits of your gear.
Yes. And I get excited about this because for me, the more that I'm learning and screwing up in those controlled environments,
You're learning more.
the more confident I am dramatically so when I go out in the field. I'm like, I know what to do here.
Right.
I know I need to use, this ISO or this shutter speed or whatever.
Well, it's the same thing that you found in terms of testing the teleconverters.
Sure.
And running those tests of saying, well, what is this teleconverter versus that teleconverter? Or if I equal it at native versus the same focal length on the same lens. You're going through all these different scenarios at different apertures. And I'm not saying that everyone should necessarily do the in-depth testing that you did because...
Well, you'd lose your mind if you did.
You'd lose your mind, and why else would you watch Josh?
Yeah.
But, and obviously you have years of experience doing this, but it's good to try it on your own, reproduce those results, maybe not to that
Well, you could
extent.
just stick within the confines of what you normally might photograph. So if you do a lot of landscape at 200, you can do some testing in those situations.
Yeah.
I'm testing the entire comprehensive range, at least as much as I can, to get everyone watching some useful information. But
because everyone's coming at it from different
right, exactly. But you, in theory, know or have some understanding of your own photographic styles and preferences, and you can contain your testing to be based around that for sure. You also probably don't have a 90-280, 100-400, 70-200, both converters, and a Leica store to yourself.
I don't
at
know.
midnight on
I
a
don't
Friday.
know about that because when we've done the show with
your kit, that's
I
true.
mean, some of these people who are watching have more Leica gear than we have, so that's not a fair assessment.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, I mean, I think that the culmination of all these little bits of advice in terms of David's sort of physical technique suggestions and my settings and some gear suggestions will get you the best possible results. But of course, if you're shooting handheld and you've got tons of light and you're stop down 2 stops, it's going to be a totally different situation. So everything is going to be based on the environment and your settings and the results you're looking for, like anything else. But in this case,
Well, I also didn't touch on, obviously you should be using image stabilization, but the second thing is also sometimes the old rules are the good rules. And in terms of shutter speed that you want to get away with, I would say double the focal length is extremely safe, especially with image stabilization. So if you're shooting at 400 millimeter, you want to shoot at, say, 7/50th of a second would be my target for shooting that
But
lens.
just to interrupt you for a moment, that's actually probably a really important test, is go out,
How slow
go
can you
outside
shoot it?
in shutter priority mode and shoot a range. A range, thank you. The word, I couldn't think of the word. And try to keep yourself steady, not artificially so, but how you would do it in the real world, and shoot it 250, 500, 640, 7, whatever, a range, and then evaluate those results. Maybe do that test 1 or 2 times and see where your threshold is, because you're much steadier than I am, so I know I need to be usually a stop faster than you. Some people are. If you're a surgeon, you're even steadier than David is. If you've had too much coffee, like I've clearly had, it's. But those are the kind of sort of testing and things you need to do.
You want to have
ahead of time.
Yeah, you want to have that knowledge in your pocket so that when you're faced with that, once in a lifetime scenario of wow, there's a bear across the road at
Miracle Mile and all that kind of stuff?
No,
It could happen.
Wherever. There's just a situation where like, oh my gosh, it's a whatever, and let me grab a camera. You don't want to have to, well, should I do this? Should I do that? No. You say, okay, I know for my testing, if I want it really sharp, I need to be at 500th of a second. Okay, to get that, I need to make my ISO.
Best comment of the show. Just get 3 cameras and 10 lenses. Yes. And make sure you get them all from Leica Store Miami.
Perfect.
It's supposed to pop up. I don't know what's happening.
The general gist is, though, the more familiar you are knowing your personal limits in terms of handholdability, knowing your gear limit in terms of its performance envelope is only to your benefit, because it means when you're now in that situation to take pictures, as I try to tell my attendees on the workshops, the time to futz with the camera is not when you're ready to take the picture.
Exactly.
The time to futz with the camera and get all your settings done is when you're in the hotel when you should be sleeping. That's when you need to be futzing with the camera.
No, it's before you leave for the trip. And this is probably the advice I give the most that's followed the least, which is, I don't care what you're shooting with, even if you're shooting with your iPhone or whatever, learn your limitations and the gear's limitations before you put yourself in a situation that you can't replicate. So you go on that trip to the Faroe Islands, you see that amazing moment, be prepared with the knowledge and that muscle memory already when you get a new piece of equipment, as opposed to figuring it out on the fly. I'm not saying that would never work out, but your odds are better.
I have experiences. This is not a new experience. A lot of people will have gotten X, Y, or Z. Like it has the packing materials, and they're taking it out of the box and then putting it on the camera and like, let's go. And then of course, firmware updating, right? Because they never used it before.
Yeah.
That's actually happened to me as well.
That's happened to me yesterday.
But yeah, that's just the thing that happens.
Yeah.
But get some familiarity under your belt. So you don't have in the field learning. You want in the field learning, obviously, and you will continue to learn and grow and gain experience. The more that you go out and shoot, the more comfortable you'll be using the gear.
Yeah.
That's a given. But do your best to do your homework before you show up for class, so to speak, and make sure that you're comfortable with that so that you don't miss those great opportunities.
Yeah. We should take a few questions, and then it's like almost 10 o'clock.
Wow.
So.
Okay. Time flies.
Jose, what do you got for us?
Let's see. Not really that many, to be honest, that we haven't talked about. Somebody asked for a 400 millimeter comparison. How would the 100 to 400 on the SO2 compared to the 90 to 280 on the Leica CL?
I don't know. That's too many variables there. I don't like. Yeah. The CL you're cropping and it's a much older camera. We love the CL, but after we got discontinued and it's kind of like disappeared.
I have one down here somewhere.
It hasn't really come up in my world. So if you can test it out if you have that kit, but there's too many disparate variables there.
Yeah.
What else you got?
Yeah. So earlier somebody asked about kind of like unlearning the memory of going from, on 92 to 80, the zoom goes
Correct,
one
it's
way.
the other way.
It's the other way.
Yeah,
I thought that would bother me, but having spent 5 hours yesterday switching between those lenses like 30 times, because I did each focal length from a different position. So I basically would shoot 70-200 by itself, extender, 100-400, 92-80, and then move and then do it all over again. I don't know. I didn't find myself constantly like fiddling with that.
I mean, it's the same on the 2490 and the 2470, and I've switched back and forth with these lenses. I don't even think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to give it like a non-answer, but that's just the truth. I mean, I literally just did this 24 hours ago, bouncing between these things, and I thought about that. Like, oh, is it going to bother me? I think part of it, especially on the 100-400, you know when it's zoomed out or not, because you can see it
physically.
And also, you're just looking through the viewfinder and seeing it, and it doesn't take much time to just
adapt.
I don't know. I guess for me, it's just not an issue. And normally I'm like really like whenever I get a new car, it takes me like 6 years to figure out where all the buttons are. But yeah, it just hasn't been a thing for either of us, I don't think. Just to be honest with you. And I'm not saying that it
Right.
may
I mean,
not be, but
I did the astrophotography workshop 2 weeks ago with Colin, and normally I use the 16-35. I use the 14-24 on that trip because there's no what did you think about aperture?
No, there was a resolution. I said there's no substitution for resolution.
Oh, what about aperture?
What rhymes with aperture? Nothing.
Contest. Right. So shooting astro, I found this lens 14 at 2.8 was extraordinarily useful because it's really sharp at 2.8. And using this as my general astro landscape lens versus the 16-35 that I've used for however many years, I didn't even think about it. I just dialed in the focal length I needed and magic. So
Any other
I
questions?
think in practical use, it's not a big deal.
There was one other. Doesn't the in-body stabilization mechanism cause vibration when the camera is on the tripod?
That's an interesting question.
It's up for debate.
Because you can kind of like, it's like paradoxical. Like,
Right.
Does it cancel itself out? But if it's not being used, is it causing more vibration? What I'll tell you is this: I was photographing both with and without it. And when the image stabilization was turned off and I'm shooting on this super stable tripod setup, I didn't feel anything going. I felt, the only thing I felt was me focusing it. And then once I'm done with that, there's no other motion happening.
I could add, though, that shooting in outdoor windy environments, even if there's just a little breeze, I find leaving it on corrects any small vibration from the tripod of moving in the wind.
Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Because I know there's a question about that too, like image stabilization, just leave it on because then if the tripod moves. But I think it's more about what kind of motion the stabilization is programmed to correct.
Sure.
Which is human motion, which is not mechanical. Like, well, mine maybe, but like, whereas a tripod, it's just, I don't know. This is one of those things that I've tried to test, and I usually end up messing something else up because there's so many variables.
Yeah.
But it'll be an interesting.
It's difficult to test.
Now that I have the 2X available, I may try it with the at 800.
Just to
and
push the limits.
just to push the limits and see. That's definitely a test I could perform next time we talk about long lenses for sure. So
Nice.
TBD.
Cool.
Okay. You want to sign us off?
You got no other questions?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Oh, that's it.
I am shocked.
I think we crushed it personally.
Okay, wait, I'm actually curious. Are there any comments in terms of what people think of the new 70-200 versus the 100-400 versus 90-280?
I did see somebody comment that when using the 2X extender, the difference in quality was negligible. Like he said, it was barely noticeable. So
Wasn't noticeable.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing we should touch on, Josh, which is, you have you kind of explained all this already. Josh is shooting with, like a 3 or 4 series tripod with a big
5 series.
a 5 series with
Huge,
a BH55. Everything is locked down. He's on electronic shutter with a 6-second self timer and a cable release in a controlled lighting environment.
Right.
With a wall that's not moving, a tripod that's not moving, a ground that's not moving. This is splitting hairs, how many angels on the head of a pin kind of stuff. When you're out in the world and you're shooting in and not indoors, and there's a little bit of wind, or a tree is moving a little bit, or the breeze is blowing, or there's atmospheric haze, or
There's a meteor.
shower, whatever it is. These smaller differences that Josh is exposing and testing become less evident because that's why we look at kind of lab generated testing results, which gives us some really good data points to base our decisions off of and base our techniques off of. But then putting it to use out in the field is a completely kind of different data points because there is more variability. And it might be that your technique was just ever so slightly better with the extender than without it, and it canceled out any possible advantage that you had without the extender. And that's just the nature of real world usage. Is it's not going to be 100% consistent from shot to shot like you would have in a pure clinical testing environment. We know that, obviously, but it's still great data to have all these controlled tests.
Yeah.
When we look at best case, worst case scenarios, in an absolute term.
Right.
But you might find, very likely, just like that comment, that using the converter versus not using the converter versus, whatever, you're like, I can barely see a difference. Because in an uncontrolled environment, you may not see the difference.
Right.
It might be perfectly fine to you.
Sure.
And that's why it comes back to, we really encourage you to try it, in your own use case.
Yes.
So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Jose, any other comments, questions, concerns?
Let's see.
Compliments about, Josh's shirt today? I don't know, anything? You do match the background very nicely. I have to say.
There you go.
With the watch and everything.
I know, right?
Yeah,
color coordinated.
It's very coordinated. Very coordinated.
Somebody had asked if putting on a case interferes with connecting to the Photos app. I don't know if you've...
I mean, not really related to what we're talking about, but
No.
it shouldn't. But
No.
I don't know. When we do a Photos app episode, we can look into it.
Yeah.
Which we will eventually do, I promise.
Yeah.
We have a long list.
Hooray.
Next year.
But I think that's it. I think we
I
can,
think our
sign us off.
next show will probably be about the
M11D.
M11D?
Yeah. I don't know. I got to get through today first, and then tomorrow, and then the next day, and then, I got to think about car for service next week. If I have to walk to work.
And I'm leaving in 2 days to go to the Dolomites for another workshop.
That's true. So that means you're going to be gone?
That means I'm going to be
I'll
gone.
just take your car.
Perfect. I can't see any downside to that.
Anyway, this was fun. I really had a good time, as much as I struggled at some points testing these crazy long lenses. But as someone who likes tele lenses a lot for what I do, this was very rewarding. And I personally learned a lot just from doing the testing. So if you are in the area, come by the Leica store sometime. I have all these lenses on display, teleconverters. You can check them out.
Unless I borrow.
Are you taking that to the
this
Dolomites?
one. I'm thinking about it. Because
Don't come to the store the next week then.
we talk about real world usage, and it might be really interesting to see how this performs relative to the 90-280.
Yeah. All right, fine. We'll talk about it off
Are
camera.
you going to send us the photo after or no?
No.
Going to keep the photos. Oh, okay.
All right, sign us off, please, Mr. Farkas.
All right. Thank you very much. Big thanks to Josh for spending his entire Friday afternoon and evening and nighttime and early morning wee hours doing that. Thanks to Jose for keeping us sharp and in focus and switched and keeping on top of what few questions there were tonight. Surprising. I'm actually surprised at
Well,
that.
because we were so informative, that's why.
That must be the
We
reason.
blew them away with our knowledge.
Boom.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
The testing was.
And a big thanks to you guys out there. As always, you can, if you want to support the channel, if you didn't pick up on it before, you can shop and make all your Leica purchases at leicastoremiami.com, where we have all of these things that we're happy to tell you about and maybe even sell to you one day. Also, you should check out some of the great gear that Josh has on our pre-owned section because he's always got some new goodies stewing
Every day.
If you want to travel with me, sometimes Jose, sometimes Colin, Peter, Kirsten, the whole team, check out the workshops that we do around the world. We're always adding new destinations, and like I said, no better place to learn than in the field. So may as well do it with us. You can also check out red.forum.com for the latest Leica news, reviews, tech articles, more. And of course, our channel on YouTube. If you're not already subscribed to Red.Forum, what are you waiting for? Do it now. Right now. Nope. Right now.
Right now. We'll wait.
We'll wait. So you'll know when we post new content. As always, smash that thumbs up button so we know that you are enjoying this content. Leave us a comment. We do actually read all those comments and reply to a lot of them as well. So if you have a question that we didn't answer or you're looking at this after the fact, happy to weigh in on it on the YouTube comments. So do check back on those. And yeah, I think that about covers it. So big thanks for tuning in on your Saturday night or whenever you're watching this in glorious full 4K. And until next time, we will see you then. Have a good weekend and a great day.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, guys.
Good night.